Hello. Hi, Dr. Carr. Good morning. Good
Hello,
afternoon.
Vanessa Honey. How are you,
Good
my dear?
everything. I am awesome. I'm awesome.
Yes, you are.
And it's good to see you back on this side of the planet and
Always.
traveled safely, rested.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you. No, I'm
Thank
saying I was looking I pulling the app up and I see that the team has Roberto Clemente at the gate of the that's beautiful.
yeah,
I like
Ahmad,
it.
let me tell you, the beauty of surrounding yourself with really talented folk who are plugged in, like for the people working with narrative, it's not a job. So
No.
I didn't have to ask him to change the face every month. It just and it's always something beautiful.
Yes.
I'm always surprised. And that to me speaks volumes about this being more than just, whatever it is. It's so much more because everybody has taken their part, that brick that we talk about. I don't have to even worry about things like that. So yeah,
No.
it's
And
beautiful.
every and like I say, everybody's paying attention. It isn't a job. It's a calling. And that's a beautiful thing because together we curate our memory and we create community. So yeah, tomorrow, the 18th of August, would be the 90th birthday of Roberto Enrique Clemente Walker. So to have him greet us at the head of this app this morning is just a yeah, that's people paying attention, working in
Yeah.
common purpose. So
And it's fulfilling on some other level because I've always felt like s- people by themselves we're very limited, no matter how brilliant you are, and you could know a lot of things, but it's the coming together. Like I was talking with you earlier about how the magic is both of us bringing our unique experiences and, the way in which we, communicate is beautiful. And I want that in every relationship to have because
yes,
it brings out more in you and it makes you think differently, which is why I think a lot of people come into Nubia because they're thinking about things they have never thought about before, or they thought they were the only one that thought that way. And now they
mm,
get to hear different perspectives and rooted and grounded in us and in history.
yes,
It's everything. So
it is everything. It is everything. So it's been a busy couple of weeks. Thank you. First of all, it would be, I guess, we're 7 hours ahead. So 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3. It'd be 3:30 in the afternoon in Kemet. And we normally by then we would be in the bullseye of out and about the tombs, temples, pyramids, museums. But so we had to do it. I think it was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning there. We did things on Friday evening. So it's good to be back here, getting back in rhythm. And we all were in South Carolina and we were in near the Sudan. So it worked out
but
convening with ancestors and with each other.
but we're still together, which was
Oh,
wild.
no question.
And I didn't plan it that way, but it was
Hmm.
really interesting that we were both someplace else with our people.
No
There
question.
were people like Sweets was with me. You had some
Oh, the
people that were at
sweets, the man.
the last Healthy Wealthy Wise. There were a bunch of people
Yes.
in South Carolina, a bunch of people from the last South Carolina Healthy Wealthy Wise in Kemet, but we're still all together. It was really nice. It was really
Oh
nice.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, yeah. Folks who wanted to be at Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise, who hadn't missed one, but who were in the Nile Valley, which is the only reason that they were not there in South Carolina. It was really quite something. Harry and Sheila Payton,
Oh,
who
Harry, the
yeah,
karaoke winners.
yeah, they could karaoke. They were there and they were saying, and every day they wore different Nubia stuff. Had global majority shirts every day, matching, rocking the all the stuff. It was just it's
They
so
are
funny to me.
so beautiful. Those are
Yes,
goals, right? If you're gonna be in that kind of commitment, they rock hard with each other, and
yeah,
it's
they do.
so beautiful to watch them.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. It was really something. One day Harry had on the Kazi is the blackest of all shirt because from talking about Mashariki Jawans and the Black Power movement and all of that, which was just beautiful. But we were on also on the journey was one of our grand elders, one of the sisters, one of the founders and pillars of the East from Brooklyn, Mama Oseye Machawi, and I was telling Harry, I said, "You see that shirt you got on? Say Kazi's Black is about." She's the reason that phrase is on your shirt, is on your chest. She just starts. I mean, this sister from the East. Of course, we talked about the book that she and her comrades did, Women of the East organization. But I mean, this, Asaya Machawi is a legend. I mean, the whole people go to the street festival, the African festival in Brooklyn in July. Well, that's one of the enduring legacies of the East. The school, the shule that they did, the bookstore, the restaurants, all of that stuff. And she was present for all of it, at the center of all of it. And so Harry come walking in with the shirt and says, "See, this is all the synergies." Are just, and we in Egypt, having that conversation with two people who only reason they missed healthy, wealthy, and wise. They were, but they, so yeah, it's coming together, Professor Hunter. We cannot,
Yeah.
say thank you enough
Yeah.
for that energy and that vision and that commitment, because it's work.
Yeah, I was saying to you also, you do a thing not expecting anybody to, you do a thing because the thing needs to be done. There's no,
Yes.
you're not looking for any, accolades or even anyone actually following, because you know that you do the thing now, not for now. Everything you do now is not for now. Whether it's working out, you work out today, you won't see results for a few weeks. You
That's right.
change your habits diet wise today. Tomorrow you won't cure your type 2 diabetes. It's going to take a few weeks, maybe a few months, but you do the thing today for the future, right? And so in that, the gratitude has to be in the work, just being grateful to do the work every day, knowing that you may not even see the end, right?
No,
Like, you have to do the work knowing that if nobody follows, it's the right thing to do.
that's
So
exactly right.
to live long enough to see the turn happen, to see things come together that I could only imagine in my mind is like, wow. And
That's
sometimes
right.
I just have to sit in it because I'm like, oh, this is a thing.
This is a thing, and we do have to sit in it. We have to sit in it. Without sitting in it, we don't come to the realization of who and where we are and what must be done. So, coming back from Kemet this week, thinking about, so much music, we were playing so much Earth, Wind, and Fire, because of course Maurice White is, so inspired by Kemet. And thinking about, in fact, it's so funny, as we're traveling through the valley and having these conversations, just as African people, it was really quite something. Mama Jeanette House, who is one of the members of the Emotions, the singing group. So you can imagine asking her about Earth, Wind, and Fire
Come on.
in the Nile Valley while she's there going through the tombs and temples and pyramid. And, talk about Boogie Wonderland with us, Mama Jeanette. I mean, it's like, it's a different thing,
Can we though? I mean, because that song, when he comes in with Midnight, what is it? Midnight
Let's
seems
see.
so lonely.
That's
And
right.
yeah,
In the hearts of men who need more than they get.
come on. I mean, the lyrics,
Daylight, and
but
it was a white woman, a man who wrote that, but it was black people who Daylight deals a bad hand to a woman who has paid too many debts. It's like, you know what? That ain't now though. Tonight we gonna dance, Boogie Wonderland. I'm not coming to. We're in the middle of the night on this. It's something.
yeah,
And of course, Kemet Uhuru was with us, but he's probably here now. And I mean, just all the song titles. You talking about the emotions. So just
mm,
but yeah, it's quite something. Of course, Maurice White was immersed in Egypt. If you want to enter Egyptology from a place of Africana cultural meaning making, just go through the album covers and liner notes. You ain't even got to get to the music of Earth, Wind, and Fire. They were very serious about that. When he decided that they needed a horn section, and that whole period in the 70s when you saw Slave and Ohio Players and Daz and all them putting horns in, Kool and the Gang. And Maurice White went and got that horn section from a group out of Chicago he had been affiliated with, the Afro Arts Movement, the Black Arts Movement in Chicago, called the Pharaohs. I mean, it's all, he brought it right into Earth, Wind, and Fire. So it's no accident.
nah. And I had Baba Philip Bailey, one of the first people to join us in class with Carr and in
Yeah,
Nubia. I was like,
yeah.
it blew my mind, but now it makes all the sense. And that's why he's here,
It
right?
makes perfect
Yeah.
sense, beautiful sense. So yeah, I mean, here we are in now the third week of Black August, and while we were gone, so much has changed. Can you believe it's only been a month since Joe Biden crossed everybody over in the establishment and gave a middle finger to him and endorsed Kamala Harris. And then she, you know, of course, overseas it looks very different because race isn't the center of the analysis. But the whole time we were in Kemet, as we talked about the other night, there was this nervousness because we know the Hezbollah is, are they going to attack Israel because Israel has taken out, leaders of their organization, and Lebanon is on pins and needles because if Israel responds, it's going to be an issue. But we were standing at the, as I mentioned yesterday, on in the morning on Sirius on 126 with Lamont King. We were literally at the tomb of Muhammad Anwar Sadat, and they were very nervous. They said we think something might happen next week, and that was last week. So we were thinking we might actually be there if something were to, and they worried that the whole region is going to go up in tension. And so, and to see Vice President Harris meeting with the members of the uncommitted movement. We were overseas when she gave that talk in Michigan after meeting with them, and then the protesters nevertheless came, and she gave them that look and then said, look, if you want Trump to win, keep talking. And then she course corrected in Arizona a little while later and said, look, I'm for immediate ceasefire. We got to work toward this. It's not taking away the arms from Israel, which will be the only thing to stop them, but it isn't what the white nationalists would do. And you see Kamala Harris emerging in real time, making these adjustments. It's very interesting to see. I mean, I know you got some thoughts about what that may or may not portend, it's very fascinating to see it from outside the country.
I'm generally actually I'm pretty optimistic, but I'm also a cynic. Like I've lived by this rule: everyone's guilty until proven innocent. It's kind of how I operate, and it's mostly self-protection. Because people, I don't want to be hurt by people, so I'm going to prod and poke and see what you're made of, and can you handle the ether? How most people show up as their best versions of themselves. I tend to do the opposite, because if you can handle the worst version of me, then we can be good forever.
Yes.
But I'm super optimistic and excited because I see in her somebody that can be pushed, and I don't want to say it like, pushed into service, but I feel like she's almost like, bring it, push me into service. The way, other leaders have, Martin Luther King was like, look, if you don't do this, and he's like, hold up. LBJ's like, hold up. And he's like, no, I'm not holding up. So he's like, okay, well, I got to get busy and get these things done, and gathered up his white nationalist friends in the Republican Party to make stuff happen. I feel it's similar with her, where she seems open to being pushed into service. And I haven't seen that. Most people lead with ego. They lead with the sense that I have ultimate power and I'm going to placate you and pat you on the head. While she is a politician, I'm not, taking that away or negating that she's a politician. I actually feel for the first time we have a potential leader that can be pushed into doing things. And we've seen the administration be pushed into making sure that folks' student loan debt got forgiven, because that was promised. And even though Trump's Supreme Court tried to block it, they found 15 ways to give people back money.
That's right.
This drug thing, the insulin, and then they doubled down with 10 more drugs and used Medicare to actually negotiate prices. And I had so many people call up and tell me how much this is going to impact them positively in their lives. The farmers, black farmers, were like, we're going to vote for Trump or whatever. And Trump's Supreme Court, allowed those white nationalists to sue to block the money.
That's right.
Somehow the Biden-Harris administration is like, run them their check. And that happened, So the story arc for me is all the people saying, the vote doesn't matter. Please stop talking, like immediately say less. But you vote and then you apply pressure. Voting is not the power itself. The power is in electing people that you can press into service, or electing people that are, like maybe in Maryland, coming willingly to do the work, So like this to me is something we haven't had before. I don't think at least in my generation, I have not seen a potential leader that is in so many ways reachable by so many different angles. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yes.
And as a rock star, not selling out arenas to sell out arenas, but still taking time with the little girls, telling them about, and then the pick that she made, the vice president, I was like, ma'am,
Right.
That was a home run that I didn't even see coming.
Home run, a message.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's like clearly there were other candidates and there were other directions to potentially go in, but it was, I guess in retrospect, years from now, when enough people have died, they will tell the truth as to what happened.
I
Um,
feel like they telling it now. Nancy Pelosi on the ropes. She getting.
she's definitely on the ropes. I
I'm
mean,
like,
she's definitely on the ropes, and that's what makes it so interesting. Yeah, as you say, I mean, individuals represent larger forces, and we are both just old enough to remember the Jesse Jackson campaigns of '84 and '88, and the white lash in the wake of those campaigns, because really what Jesse was what those around Jesse were doing, and that's not without criticism. Adolph Reed wrote a great book called The Jesse Jackson Phenomenon, where he's dealing with it. They all worked on that campaign. Bernie Sanders emerges first as a political figure in many ways in that period when he's mayor of Burlington, with the Rainbow Coalition. But that whole platform was a mass movement that started in the 60s. Fannie Lou Hamer in 1964, the Democratic National Convention. And then 4 years later, in 1968, what happened in Chicago, which, as people are going to Chicago next week, people are saying, well, maybe there'll be a reprise. It won't be a reprise, but there are some similar elements. But Jackson's was an insurgent campaign. It wasn't run to become Democrats. It was run in a duopoly, a two-party system, to say which of these parties do we have the best chance of pushing to advance our interests. That's what everybody misses when they say, well, the Democrats and Republicans are the same. You need to have third party. Okay, everybody understand that third party politics is not just electoral politics. So anybody talking about third party only when presidential election cycles come on have demonstrated they don't understand how party politics work. But you're not going to win a presidency with a third party insurgent campaign. What you can do, however, while you're building your political strength, and again, Jackson in '84, you got to go back 12 years to '72 when he is the co-chair with Amiri Baraka of the National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana. We need a black independent party. We still do. But that doesn't mean you run a black independent party candidate for president. That same '72, Shirley Chisholm runs for president. She doesn't come to Gary. That is that some of that is about sexism, but most of it is about politics. I mean, in other words, you're running for president of one of the two president of the United States, and under the two-party system, these people in Gary are talking about building black political power outside of the two-party system. And 12 years later, Jesse Jackson, riding all that momentum from the 60s, the momentum that forced the Democratic Party to open up after Miss Hamer and the people from Mississippi challenged them. Now you got to rethink everything from how you do representation to what becomes super delegates. In '68, the whole thing falls apart. And I'll talk a little bit later about a new book that came out that talks about '68. But I'm saying I have to say that here we are in 2024. There is no Barack Obama presidency without that movement in the '80s. Without that movement in the '70s, without that movement in the '60s, without the foundation for that movement in the '50s and '40s and the '30s in terms of voting rights in places like Texas, and, Nixon versus Allwright, and all the folks we've talked about. These are the same people who celebrated Juneteenth in Texas and then went to court to break open, using the 14th and 15th Amendments, the exclusion of Africans from voting. Check your voter registration. Check your voter registration. Check your voter registration, because they're lining up to steal it. That's what they're doing. All this blah blah that Trump is doing is in many ways a distraction. When we were in the Nile Valley, Valencia Watkins gave a talk one night, and it turned into a talk about voting rights, and she talked about that. There's a lot of this stuff spectacle is a distraction, but Jesse is being honored in Chicago this week. That's a great irony, because it comes at a moment when we see the Democratic Party, perhaps, not perhaps, for sure, in some ways, always has been, at least since the '60s, become an unwilling host for the politics of people who they would prefer not to hear from, except they still got to vote in this country, at least up until until unless Trump wins, at which point he says you ain't got to vote no more. That's when you're going to find out. you
I,
know?
I think
But yeah,
what's becoming really clear is that the Democratic Party only doesn't exist if we say it doesn't exist
no
per se.
question.
When we show up fully, we're the party. They
That's
tried to
right.
get Ilhan Omar out. They got Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman out the paint. But I also feel like both of them were flawed candidates in terms of how they negotiated their candidacy. Ilhan Omar never first, and this is interesting because Minnesota, is very, very white, very, very not Muslim. And they put Keith Ellison in Congress, first Muslim elected to Congress with 6%, I think 6% black, 1% Muslim. And Ilhan Omar got reelected got more votes this time than she did last time with the candidate that was running against her.
It's true.
And she's 100% squad, and Rashida Tlaib, because they're committed to their constituents, right? And it's not just about, you can rah, but you got to also take care of home. And when when they support us, it's a symbiotic relationship. If you're doing the work at home, people are going to do the work for you. It's just simple math. So
No,
I'm watching them forced into this false sense that they had power, the Nancy Pelosi's and the Clintons or whatever. And you see how quickly the tide is turning and how they jumping off and on bandwagons. I'm like, okay, because nobody wants to be on the wrong side of history, right? Nobody wants to be left out. So they pretending right now to be in line. But it also, I think, this time has revealed a lot. And I'm so grateful to have lived through it.
No, they have a great deal. A great deal. They revealed a great deal. And yes, Bowman and Bush, the political choices they made didn't help them. In fact, particularly in Bowman's case, probably weakened them. But at the same time, when you compare them to absolute cancers in the federal legislature, like Lauren Boebert or Marjorie Taylor Greene, who do nothing for any constituent, I think Cori Bush, probably her chief flaw was that she led with her chin about issues that involve people. I mean, how many members of the federal legislature have been housing insecure or unhoused? I mean, we remember that she actually camped out on the steps of the Capitol to draw attention to issues. She, I think she opened herself up, she opened herself up to the great tragic reality in this country, in this idiocracy, which is people don't show up. Right. I mean, Wesley Bell, the rented Negro now who occupies that seat, who AIPAC pumped almost $9 million into the American Israel Political Action Committee. Shout out to AIPAC. They're only doing your job. When we don't do our job, that's how it happens.
Period.
And so, at Cori Bush, we haven't heard the last from her. It'd be interesting to see if Wesley Bell, I guess he'll complete his term. I mean, they've pumped too much money in him for him not to, but this man is going to be a pariah, political pariah, if he, shows up as the kind of rented Negro that he has shown up in so far. So remember now, this is the guy who was supposed to prosecute the killer of Michael Brown Jr. and didn't. If you ask Leslie McSpadden or Mr. Mike Brown Sr. about who Wesley Bell is, prepare to hear a string of invectives and curse words. Ran as a progressive prosecutor, not to say that he didn't run on that platform, that he and Cori Bush don't have a lot of overlap in terms of their positions, unlike the stooge who ran against and was pumped up by AIPAC to run against Jamal Bowman. But it will be interesting, as you say, in the case of Ilhan Omar, in the case of Rashida Tlaib, who, if anything, there is even more, well, I won't say more vitriol, I don't want to make it comparative, because Bowman and Bush are black after all, and the deep-seated racism in Zionism has a particular itch to scratch when it comes to African people, as the Ethiopian Jews, for example, in Israel. And that kind of transfers to African people outside of that region. But there is a particular vitriol when you start talking about two Muslims in terms of Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. And you're right, from very different political circumstances. Omar in an overwhelmingly white district, liberal district in Minnesota, creating the fear that people can come in their full cultural selves and see our common humanity. And then nothing terrifies a fascist or a racist more than the idea that people can still be who they are and make common cause, because that is poison to fascism. It's poison to white nationalism. It's poison to Zionism, quite frankly. It's poison to ethno-nationalism. So we start talking about Zionism in that regard. We're talking about ethno-nationalism, the idea of an all certain group of people state, exclude people based on how they came out of their mother's wombs. So that's what we're talking about, an ethno state. Everybody in Israel doesn't want an ethno state. There are millions who are protesting right now against Bibi Netanyahu and his mass killers of the Israeli Defense Force. But those people are often silenced in mass commercial news, entertainment, media, and they don't want an ethno state. They want everybody to be able to exercise their political rights and have guaranteed protections, and that would include anyone instead of Israel. That would be the way forward, the most progressive way forward. But anyway, so yeah, when you start talking about Muslims, like Ilhan Omar presents a threat. Why? Because you can't scare her electorate. As you say, in addition to constituent services, she's out there on the front lines all the time. And you can't scare the mostly black folk who vote for Rashida Tlaib, who, as we remember, holds the seat that was once held by Congressman John Conyers. And that becomes even more problematic in a different way for the fascists, for the ethno-nationalists, for the racists. Because Rashida Tlaib, first of all, if you don't know, if you've never seen her and don't know anything about her background, you assuming Tlaib is an Arabic name, right? But Rashida, you know, black people name Rashida. So out of Detroit, from Detroit. And as somebody, you know, when we were there for the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America conference the year before John Conyers made transition, and Rashida Tlaib made it her business to come and meet with us on Sunday morning at the church. That's when Mama Joanne Watson was still with us on this side. Now she's an ancestor. You know, just a down to earth sister. Rashida Tlaib is about that business, and she's in that community, she's in that neighborhood, and that presents a different kind of challenges because, you know, there's a deep hatred for Muslims, for Islam, among the most fascist and white nationalist and ethno-nationalist folks. And you can't do anything because at least until you cancel elections or steal them, they're going to return her. So you're right, it's a pregnant moment in terms of U.S. politics, the duopoly politics, the two party tower politics. So to return from a place that is a majority Muslim country like Egypt, saw Baba Jelani, good to see you, brother, in the chat here in Nubia, mentioning one of our 4 tour guides, Brother Muhammad, who is Nubian, in addition to being Muslim. Muhammad, who was on the orange bus, and, you know, each bus gets a color to keep us going. We had about 105 folk this time in the Valley. We took it down a little bit to see how that number worked. We might double it again next year. By the way, the materials will be out probably in the next month. So if you're thinking about it, always mark your calendar for the first 2 weeks of August. It isn't a Nubia trip exclusively; it's open up to our community broadly. But the center of the grounding for this year and last year certainly has been Nubians, and it's been a beautiful thing to be in community with the Nubians without a K and to forge those relationships. That's one thing Mama Jeanette was talking about, doing closer work. But, you know, to be in a Muslim country with people who are just beautiful souls, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the first time we did in class when we were in Luxor, before we got to Aswan. Brother Muhammad on the orange bus, Brother Imad with the blueberries, as they call themselves, the blue bus, another good brother, Nubian from the region of Aswan, who really helped us grapple with questions of honesty and transparency and how communities are built, which was very valuable to us as he talked about Nubia in real time, what we call Nubia now, the Nubians in the south of Egypt, Aswan. The brother who was on our bus, my friend and brother, Brother Abdul, we call ourselves the Royal Family as a homage to the great Asa Grant Hilliard III, when traveling in the Nile Valley with the great tour guide King Farouk Harney. He had 2 buses, and they named one the Holy Family and the other the Royal Family. So together they were the whole Holy Royal Family. It's something that has lasted over the years, and so we named our bus the Red Bus, the Holy Royal Family. But for Abdul was floating in the ether when we came out the sky at the Cairo airport, man. I always love embracing that brother. We saw him at the hotel, like, bro, how you doing, man? He had just come back from the Hajj. He and his wife had made Hajj for the first time. And I said, man, how was the Hajj, brother? And he was like, it was the greatest experience of my life. It was the most spiritual experience of my life. He said, all of us, millions there in Mecca, and it didn't matter whether you were a head of state or somebody who cleaned the toilets, you're going to be together shoulder to shoulder. Nobody gets any favor when we go out there and do the ritual. And he's showing me pictures, and it was a beautiful picture of him standing there in his white robe, white terry cloth robe, and sandals. And he just had this look of peace and contentment on his face. How can you be mad at that? I'm not talking about Al-Qaeda for Muslims. I'm just talking about the Ku Klux Klan, or the white Christian nationalists like Smiling Mike Johnson from Louisiana. That's not Christianity. That's fascist, ethno-nationalist, white nationalism. Just like they would say Al Qaeda is not Islam. At its greatest, these ways of knowing embrace our full and common humanity. And then, of course, the final bus that we had, the green bus, green is life. Our brother Ahmed. Ahmed was the only non-Nubian in the tour guides, but Ahmed has worked primarily with black groups coming in the Nile Valley for many years, whether it be Tony Browder or Manu Ampem and so many others. So to have that quartet, we were very blessed to be in that conversation. So returning from Kemet and thinking about this in the context, we thought that maybe we spend a few minutes today, this week, drawing from Black August and Black August's admonition to study, fast, train, and fight. These four elements coming out of Black August, which began to be celebrated immediately in the wake of the assassination of George Jackson. Saudade, brother George Jackson, in prison there in August 1971, almost a year to the day from the killing of his brother Jonathan, who was determined to break him out of jail when it became clear that he and his comrades would never see the end of prison. George Jackson is sentenced to a 1 year to life sentence, which means every year they could just keep him in jail forever. And then they tried to accuse him of killing a prison guard, he and two of his brothers, the Soledad brothers, as they were known. But I won't get into that too much because, again, all of this work that we have been doing, connected to all of the work that everyone else is doing around these and related topics, is out there to access. And if you want to look at our conversations about it, it's very simple. You can go to our conversations on Black August, session 74, session 76, session 126. We've talked about this in great length. And of course, we evoked and read from and discussed, and prophets, you were reading and rereading Blood in My Eye by George Jackson.
And the digital version is available in Knarrative under resources on the bookshelf.
Yes.
You can read Blood in My Eye by George Jackson in Knarrative.
In Knarrative. And that's so thank you. Very important. Again, what good is knowledge if it isn't accessible? We're jailbreaking. We have jailbroken. We are deeply centered in that. And I'm glad you said that, because we're not mirroring the universities. We're not mirroring college. We are recreating the way learning should always take place, guided by individual study and collective study, by individual care, individual caring about your physical well-being, mental well-being. That's why the second principle is fasting in August. Purify yourself. And I'll be quite frank with you.
Wait, say more about that. What's the first principle?
First principle is study. We have to study.
Okay,
Yeah,
where can people find these principles?
Well, if you go look out there, and like I said, when we look at our conversation, 74, 76, and 126, we talk about it. But if you want to go out and look, just go on your search engines and look up Black August and type those principles in. And what you'll see is they emerge in 1972, 73 as first in the prisons. You read Orasami Burton's most recent book, very good book, Tip of the Spear. Young brother here in the DC area, Professor Burton, makes the point that in many ways we're all in prison. So when you see prisoners, and the United States doesn't have political prisoners, at least by their definition. Of course they have political prisoners. Mumia Abu-Jamal, Leonard Peltier, so many others that are in prison now. But you can find those principles in any discussion of Black August, and you can see where they come from. The first one being study. Of course, George Jackson's 19 years old when they put him in jail. But it's in jail, in prison, where he starts to read, not jail, prison, where he starts to read and study. He has nothing but time. So he's reading everything, Marx, Nietzsche, Frantz Fanon. He's reading and thinking, and he's putting a study group together. They form a prison chapter of the Black Panther Party, he and his comrades, and they study. So what good is studying? Studying allows us to focus. It allows us to get a deeper understanding of where we are in time and space. And then from that, we understand what must be done. As Anderson Thompson said, and I'll talk about him more in a second, We always talk about Dr. Thompson. In fact, today, the 17th of August, if you're watching this today, participating in this session live, is the 5th anniversary of the ritual that we had at the Jusabo Museum in Chicago for Dr. Thompson, the memorial. Anderson Thompson, the defender of Kush, as he was known in his Kemetic name. Very important. But Dr. Thompson would always say history is about the future. All history is about the future. And so study is the first principle. You don't just study the past to learn about the past. You study about the past to think about and to then begin to see how historical rhythms operate, what to anticipate will happen next, how to change the course of history. You got to know it to be able to change it. Otherwise, you're at the mercy of those who have other agendas, whether they know the history or not. And so fasting became something that emerged out of these prison movements because, you're talking about people eating garbage, people trying to change their lives in a condition that makes it very difficult to do. So austerity, discipline really is what all these 4 principles are about. Discipline becomes something that is forced upon you in some ways in terms of how prisons are regulated. When to go to sleep, when to wake up, when to eat, when to do 1 hour of exercise, when to have to spend years, as George Jackson did, in solitary confinement. Your life is imposed by a social structure that does that. But in terms of governance, who we are to each other, you can also elicit great discipline out of that. Like Haj Malik El-Shabazz, who kicked narcotic in prison. The discipline that was imposed on him was joined with and ultimately transcended by the discipline that he imposed on himself. The Nation of Islam, a governance formation entity. You can kick this drug. We're going to have this way of knowing enter your life through the Nation of Islam, through the question of peace, freedom, justice, and equality. A critique of the social structure embodied in a phrase that became ubiquitous with the Nation of Islam: the white man is the devil. But that's just a point of entry, because the transformation has to be about yourself. Hence the Honorable Elijah Muhammad saying self-knowledge. Accept your own and be yourself when you read Message to the Black Man. And so this question of discipline emerges in study, in fasting, kind of purifying, allowing your body to reset, your mind to reset by relying on those things that you can rely on and trying to eliminate those things that are unnecessary, the poisons. And once you start talking about that, then you think about how now, having fasted, how having studied and continue to study, these are continuous exercises. Training requires a discipline. Whether you're working in a gym, whether you're doing push-ups or doing your daily walk, your daily constitution, or whether you're reading X number of pages a day or writing X number of pages a day. Maybe you're writing a little poetry. Maybe you're writing in your journal. Maybe you're sitting and reading and thinking. That's a form of training. You're training your mind. You're training your body. You're training your spirit. So study and fasting and training, all preparing you to fight. Intellectual warfare. Andy Thompson, Anderson Thompson, Wahem Perry Cush, the defender of Kush, the one who remembers Kush. This is, I've shown you many times, and I'm very proud of this. We're going to resume our print editions of this and figure out how to distribute it as well electronically. This is the Compass, the journal of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. That's Kwaku Larry Crow's photograph of Anderson Thompson on the cover. I was able to put this in his hand shortly before he made transition. The same weekend that the memorial, no, that wasn't the year before the memorial was held for him, because he made transition the following year. This is Anderson Thompson, the great Anderson Thompson. And in our journal, this is volume 2, issue 1. We published in this volume, again with our managing editor, Angie Porter, The Decade of Truth, African Intellectual Warfare Against Nomadic Historiography. This article you see by Anderson Thompson with Hemi Perry Cush. This article starts with a quote from Sheikh Anta Diop and then one from Anderson Thompson. The one from Sheikh Anta Diop says, "Thus imperialism, like the prehistoric hunter, first killed the being spiritually and culturally before trying to eliminate it physically. The negation of the history and intellectual accomplishments of Black Africans was cultural, mental murder, which preceded and paved the way for their genocide here and in the world. So when you don't remember the time and space, you don't remember that what has happened, then your future is bleak, because all history, as Andy Thompson would say, is about the future. When your memory is truncated, you become a figment of other people's imagination. One night we were in conversation. Every night we would have gatherings where we would talk about what we had seen and talk about what we're going to see the next day, and then bring up any topic that would be brought up. Made for some very powerful interventions over the arc of 2 weeks. And I remember one of the things I said was, I have no problem with a 1619 project if it begins in 1619 BC. Because when you start your history with the trauma, no matter how heroic you attempt to investigate and narrate the resistance, and it all is very heroic, you've made the fatal flaw of starting with the trauma. And that is not only simply unacceptable, it then grounds your sense of possibility in perpetual resistance, and nobody should be fighting all the time. Black August, for many ways, is a New Year's moment. For me, it's a moment of reclamation, reflection, ritual. And it's a moment to remember that it's through that discipline that we can recover, but that ultimately it ain't about fighting all the time. It's about engaging in that struggle so that you don't have to fight. That's the beauty of it. But Andy Thompson's quote here at the beginning, Professor Thompson says, following the instructions of Job, the great Senegalese scholar, of course, and John Henry Clark, Dr. Thompson says, I always say to my new students, largely Africans in America, until you know Egypt, you will never know Africa. Until you know Africa, you will never know yourself. Until you know Europe, you will never know why you do not know yourself. Until you know Asia, you will never know why Europe. This principle is the basis of our study. What Thompson is basically saying there is that the social structure that we find ourselves in this quote unquote modern world system is one that has been contrived to oppress most of humanity. And in terms of the racial dimension, which did not exist in ancient Egypt or the ancient world in the ways that we think about it now, that dimension means that African people will inexorably and permanently be on the bottom as long as you buy into that system. The reason we go to Egypt isn't just to marvel at the architecture, although we do marvel at the architecture. It's always something to see when African people see those pyramids for the first time in the Giza Plateau, or who for the first time walk through the temple complexes at Ephesus and southern Opet, Luxor, Thebes and Luxor, and see the big reflecting pool, or the big pool, and then see the obelisk of Hatshepsut, the Tekken of Hatshepsut, and realize that that's where Washington, D.C. modeled its downtown. Or come around that corner to look on the largest temple in the Nile Valley, the temple built for Ramses II, and the one adjacent to it for his partner, his queen, Nefertari. The beautiful one has come, the translation there. And to see that look on people's face when they look at this behemoth and realize, yeah, your people did that. And we'll talk more about that in a minute in terms of some things we talked about. But I want to just evoke Anderson Thompson, because he was the one in his generation in the 60s, 70s, 80s, all the way up through the end of his physical life a couple of years ago. It was Dr. Thompson who led the push for us, those of us in the African world outside of Africa, and in Africa for that matter, to focus on Nubia, most of which lies in a land that we would now also call Kush, Merowe, Aksum, in a country now, a state in terms of the artificial lines that divide us far too often, called Sudan. So he spent a lot of time in Sudan. Dr. Thompson says this at the end of his long article, The Decade of Truth, this 30-page article that opens volume 2, issue 1 of the Compass, the Journal of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. Invaluable work that the Compass is doing. Dr. Thompson says, Africans in the United States have a special role to play in the 21st century battle for control of African destiny. We are the captive nation that does not even know we are a nation. As the global battle lines are being drawn, we face a multiplicity of challenges, a whole set of 21st century battles for the African mind and the African heart. How we face these challenges will determine who and what we are as Africans, and will govern our very existence, survival, and future as a people. When he writes that, This is years before there is a Senator Kamala Harris. This was published near the end of his life, but it was written many years before and rewritten and then edited lovingly by his comrades at the Kemet Institute, who began their journeys, their study tours on the African continent in the mid 1970s, led initially by his very good friend and comrade, in many ways, his inextricable partner in this intellectual warfare, the great Jacob Hudson Carruthers. Jedi Shimshu Jehudi, the one who speaks, is a companion of Jehudi. So it was Thompson and Carruthers in many ways leading out this. And if you talk to Dr. Carruthers, as Baba Jedi or Baba Jake would always say, he said it was Anderson Thompson that saved me from being a Negro. When I encountered him in Chicago, he pulled me into this. Andy Thompson, in many ways, is the keystone to so much of what we're doing now. And so few of those Africans are still with us physically. Many of them are ancestors now, including Thompson and Carruthers, but there are others who are comrades of theirs, like Mariba Kelsey, who will be 100 next June, who's still with us. Comrades and partners like Ife Carruthers, of course, Kemetic Institute, and Charles and Carolyn Grantham, who write about what that trip in 1987 when 1,000 Africans came and descended out of the sky into Aswan and changed the way we think about relationships between Africans outside of Africa and Africans in Africa, in the Nile Valley, the Nubians. Folks like Kwaku Larry Franklin Crow, of course, who was on that 1987 trip, who still do walk the earth. But Dr. Thompson, when he's saying this, he's not thinking about Barack Obama or Kamala Harris. However, what we saw was that the axis of U.S. politics hasn't changed completely. It's still a duopoly. It's still a settler colonial capitalist project, and it's still going to disintegrate at some point, maybe sooner rather than later. However, you can't intervene because all history is about the future. And whatever the plans of a Pelosi, whatever the plans of a Schumer, whatever the plans of whatever the Democratic Party was going to try to do after bumping off politically Joe Biden, the move, once Biden endorsed Harris, which gummed up the works for a lot of folks. Somebody writing in the New Yorker this week about this, and as I got my mail and began to go through my physical print copies of the magazines I was reading overseas online, and it's very frustrating when you can't find a physical newspaper online. I can't find a physical newspaper anywhere in the Nile Valley. At least I used to be able to get the International Herald Tribune. They don't even have that anymore, even in the hotels. And believe me, I looked. But in that process, when Biden endorses Harris in U.S. politics, Black women immediately, followed by Black men, immediately set the tone by overflowing the boundaries of whatever they thought they were going to do. And to your observation, Professor, I think you're right. It certainly resonates with me at this juncture. Whatever plans Kamala Harris has, the vice president has in her mind, in her heart, they've been emboldened and they've been emboldened and enabled by the spirit of people who are not waiting on her to set the agenda. Those sisters in the governance formation that they've been doing for years now on their regular Sunday call established a beachhead and a foundation that was picked up with. And we can talk about policy, we can debate the veracity of the two-party system, but what you cannot debate is that was a governance move connected and filtered through Africana ways of knowing that literally jump-started what we are seeing now, this less than a month-long phenomenon of the Harris presidential bid. And so it's easy then to pick a white man who, in retrospect, looks like he is the only pick that she could have made. It wasn't the astronaut out of Arizona. It certainly wasn't the governor of Pennsylvania. It was not the governor of North Carolina. It was the Friday Night Lights governor of Minnesota. It's like, that makes perfect sense. But if we all know that there was extreme pressure on her, from everybody from single issue interest groups to those who could give less of a damn about our well-being, and sometimes those groups are the same. Much of the time they're the same, for her to pick somebody else, but she didn't. Make no mistake about it, that ability to do what she wanted to do was emboldened, was energized, was infused with energy as a result of the independent movement of African people in the immediate wake of the announcement that she would be the pick or the endorsement. The best laid plans of Pelosi's and Schumer's thrown askance. Who knows what Barack Obama wanted, and who cares at this point? Because at that point, you got to fall in line too, sir. And so, is Kamala Harris Barack Obama? No, she is not. Is she Jesse Jackson? No, she is not. Is she Wes Moore, who, when introducing the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, this week in Maryland, right down the street here at the great Prince George's Community College, as we talked about yesterday, Lamont and I, on Urban View Mornings, when he introduced them as 46 and 47 in terms of their presidencies. The crowd started shouting 48, 48. And maybe Wes Moore is who we thought Barack Obama was, or who some people thought Barack Obama was. He's certainly not Kamala Harris, and she's not Barack Obama, and he's not Jesse Jackson, and he's not Shirley Chisholm, and he's not Dick Gregory, and he's not Lucy Parsons in the 19th century, or George Washington Williams in the early 20th century, late 19th century. All these people who have run for president, certainly not the novelty campaigns of Dizzy Gillespie, John Burke's Dizzy Gillespie, who ran for president, Dizzy for president, so to speak. None of them are each other. However, they are all part of a piece of a larger movement of African people in a liberation struggle that sees electoral politics not as a destination, not as an end all and be all, but as one more tool and weapon in the struggle. In the struggle, as we study, as we fast, as we train, as we fight. You don't leave any weapon unused as long as you're anchored. And so when Dr. Thompson talks about how the fact that how we face these challenges will determine who and what we are as Africans and will govern our very existence, survival, and futures of people, he's saying we study the past, especially the deep past, so that we can shed the burden of trauma as the starting point of how we look at ourselves in the world and make better decisions in real time in the pulsing living now, guided by what we want rather than what we think we can get exclusively, and understanding that no one battle is the battle for everything, that it all works together. He ends this article, The Decade of Truth, African Intellectual Warfare Against Nomadic Historiography. He ends it with a paragraph entitled, What Path Must We Take? You see it there on page 39 of the Compass, Volume 2, Issue 1. He says, we are the inheritors of the more than 6,000-year-old legacy of the Nile Valley. This legacy was passed on to us from our most ancient African ancestors who lived, loved, and fought. The nomads fought among themselves and worked along the Nile River. In this, our decade of truth, our sacred mission, as Dr. Leonard Jeffries teaches us, is to build Mother Africa's top-notch, well-equipped, intellectual army. Our army's mission will be to rescue the ancient Nile Valley from the ideological, historical, and intellectual tyranny of the West. What is our goal? That Thompson writes, what is our goal? He asks, what is our goal? He writes, to change the world. We will achieve our goal by taking control of world history and giving not just the facts of history, but the ideas that have shaped our history. It's very important to think about that. Coming back from Kemet, a place that was visited in the 1940s and 50s by the great Yosef Ben Yakinen, Yosef Antonio Alfredo Ben Yakinen, Dr. Ben, who lived into the mid-90s, who had to sleep in the desert in the Nile Valley because he could not stay at the hotels that were segregated then. Think about that every time we pass, as we did a couple of days ago, riding up the Nile to go to one of the big villages on Elephantine Island. Elephantine Island, known in ancient times as Abu, elephant. Ain't no elephants in Greece, friends. Ain't no elephants in Europe, except the ones that Hannibal rode over to Rome, but which he had to bring from Africa. Abu, tell you it's an African civilization. But thinking about that, Dr. Ben sleeping in the desert, saying he had to sleep in the desert as we passed one of the hotels and wouldn't let him stay there. The old Cataract Hotel. The old Cataract Hotel where Agatha Christie used to stay, which has been revived and restored and is sitting up over a hill looking over the Nile Valley in what we would call Nubia in Aswan, where we spent the last half week. And you come up the Nile, you're on the boat, and you look and you see the old Cataract Hotel. You realize Dr. Ben couldn't stay there in the 40s and 50s. By the 70s, Jacob Carruthers and the Kemetic Institute, they could stay there. By 1987, a decade plus later, when 1,000 Africans came to the Nile Valley to celebrate the fourth meeting of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, and I thought about it, I would have pulled the program and shown y'all the program. I'm looking over there at the file that has it, the fourth program. There were a lot of people there, including a couple of young brothers who went because their uncle, Lenny, and their aunt, Rosalind, took them. Leonard Jeffries and Rosalind Jeffries took his brother's sons. Hassan, who is now a professor at Ohio State University, and another young brother. I forget what he's done. He's done something in politics. Oh, yeah. Hakeem Jeffries. Yeah. The soon to be Speaker of the House, the United States House of Representatives. People go out there and do their job. But at any rate, and again, this isn't about a purity test, because some things, as John Clark was saying, some stories, it ain't no good guys. But one thing's for sure, them two boys was in the Nile Valley among the 1,000 of Africans who came to the Nile Valley in 1987 for the 4th conference of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization. And to this day, standing with Brother Mohammed Noor, a longtime employee at Egypt Air, who always comes to see us because his village is on Elephantine Island, spending time with him the other night. He reminded me that, Dr. Thompson, who was there, of course, among the 1,000 in 1987, came back the following year by itself and spent a month in Egypt and the Sudan, simply going through the temples and tombs, going in and out of everything, going into the museums, and then going to Sudan and doing the same thing. There are more pyramids in Sudan than in Egypt. And studying Kush and understanding the connections there. This very quietly, as Muhammad reminded me. Muhammad was a little boy when he first met Dr. Ben, maybe 7, 8 years old. Muhammad is now, he said he's nearing retirement age. So that's about 50 years ago. And talking with this brother who, if he kept his mouth shut, you would think he was a black dude from the south side of Chicago. And it's just like, we keep our mouth shut, you would think that these are black dudes from the north end of Elephantine Island, from Abu in Aswan in Kemet in Egypt. There's a feeling that runs, as they say in the Christian church, from heart to heart, breast to breast. That feeling from soul to soul. And that feeling, that way of knowing, binds us to a governance formation that creates an obligation. And in 1987, an obligation was created among Africans in the world, and the Nubians, those Africans in the Nile Valley, that echoes to this day. They still talk about Dr. Ben. They still talk about the 1987 conference at the Aswan Cultural Center. And they talk about all the journeys that have taken place since. We came back 9 years later in 1996 for the ASCAC conference, had it in Accra, Ghana, and in Cairo. No, in Cairo, Luxor, and then Aswan is where we had the big conference in 1996. And, as a young person, myself, Dr. Mario Beatty, Dr. Lethea Watkins, we were present there. And so many people, Theophilo Benga, Tony Browder, Asa Hilliard, so many people, and Zinga Radabisha Heru, so many people, Dr. Yasantewa Blake, Dana King, so many people were there in that convening. And that was a moment. 1996, Jacob Carruthers, Ife Carruthers. 1996, when we came there, we received instruction in Accra, Ghana, and in Aswan, Egypt. We split the time between West and East. Shout out to Sister Erica, who was on our trip, who's now in Ghana, who left Cairo flying west. Said, now I'm going to spend some time in Ghana. And our dear sister and friend, Kat Adams. Kat, who had just come back from Ghana with students and then came and went to the Nile Valley for the 2nd year in a row. Being in those spaces, in 1996, we received the instruction. The instruction is, you're the next generation. You have to take the next leg. When this journal was published, and our friend and sister Noel Gardner took me out to see Dr. Thompson, who by then was in an assisted living facility. Shout out to his children, to his daughter-in-law, sons, who entrusted me with some of his things. One of the things that I have that I treasure very greatly is his Alpha history book, Anderson Thompson, because he was a member of Alpha fraternity, as was I. We are not Black Greeks. You can say that as much as you want. As you talk about Black Greeks, I'm just going to turn down the volume on it. But in fact, we had a sister with us from Togo who said her awakening came decades ago when she bought a little book called Stolen Legacy by George Granville Mona James, a native of Guyana who taught for many years at HBCUs in the United States, including Arkansas Normal, now known as the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. And she said, I had never read it until I got older. And when I read it, I was like, I'm not going to be satisfied until I see these things for myself that George G.M. James is writing about. We're not talking about the historical accuracy of everything George James is writing about. We're talking about the intellectual thrust underneath it, the desire, the will, the discipline to do that work, particularly when you're isolated in a space at a time, as in 1954 when Stolen Legacy was published, George James was. But in that process of thinking about these intellectual debts we owe and thinking about how we pay them to the future, as I said, in 1996, we invested with that faith that we would be the next to take this leg. Hard to believe that was almost 30 years ago. And most of the people we're talking about this day are ancestors now. But I'll never forget putting this in Dr. Thompson's hands within the year of his transition, because we had brought his article to publication. Again, the Women and Men of the Kemetic Institute of Chicago, one of our foundational study groups, did that. They distributed the editing responsibility. Yvonne Jones, Muriel Balla, Charles Kellen Grantham, Ife Carruthers. They distributed the editorial responsibility. They took their lead as editors to edit Dr. Thompson's work, and I put it in his hand. And by then he had an advanced kind of assault on his mind from the kind of things that we see too often with advanced age. Things that the drug companies profit from. Again, the white Christo nationalist MAGA Mike Johnson saying in the wake of the announcement by the Biden-Harris administration that the negotiated price for medicines, negotiated under the Inflation Reduction Act, the act that none of the white nationalist parties signed on and that all will no doubt campaign on, even as we heard their addled leader, their brain-rotting leader say the other day that I did the insulin, whatever the hell that means. Did you snort insulin, inject it like you did cocaine? No, but I did the insulin, meaning, just now straight out lies. But don't worry, the white nationalists are going to claim credit for capping the price of the 10 prescription drugs that will save billions, but more importantly, will take down the copays significantly and take down the costs by as much as 85%, 83%, as little as 38, 39%, as much as 83%, memory serves me correctly, for people who have to have their medicine, their monthly supply of blood thinner, their monthly supply of drugs and drugs for diabetes and things like that. But those same drug companies with their lobby and their own rented politicians like MAGA Mike, Christo fascist, Ku Klux Klan adjacent Johnson saying that this is price fixing and price gouging. And you're stifling innovation. And what you're stifling is unbridled larceny, stealing people's money to pump it into your profits, into your stock buybacks. But in that process, these drugs that are developed, perhaps they will get a cure one day for Parkinson's or cure for Alzheimer's, and memory won't be assaulted like it assaulted so many like Anderson Thompson and others. But coming to the assisted living facility and putting that book in his hand as he sat there, recognizing me, recognizing Noel, but also not remembering many other things. When I put that book in his hand, he looked at it. I took a picture of it. He saw his face on the cover. I said, Baba, this is your article. We made it. Now it is preserved for generations to read and think and use to organize and build and to study the decade of truth. This is a brilliant article. A brilliant article. We could go through it chapter and verse. Maybe we will one night in office hours. Chronology, how Eurocentric historiography is narrated. You see the chart there. I mean, it's full of charts. I mean, you talk about an editing job. They had to do an editing job in this that was quite substantial because Dr. Thompson took his time and really grappled with a lot of issues. But at any rate, he looked at it. He looked at me. He looked at it. They looked at me and said, we have to be serious now. Anderson Thompson said. He looked at me and said, it's time for you all to take the next leg. In that moment, it was clear he not only knew who I was, he knew who we were. He remembered and knew the thing that he has been preaching his whole adult life. Hell, before that, really, when him and his friend Harold Pates, who is now in his 90s, were paper boys for the Chicago Defenders when they were in single digits age, knee pants, as they used to say. Imagine that. Imagine the 1930s and 40s. That's what we're talking about. He said, we have to be serious now. It's time for you all to take the next leg. And he looked at the book. It's a beautiful thing to know that you've been trusted to carry that on. In the mid-90s, that's what we were trusted to do. And since 1996, when we went back to the Nile Valley in 2007 in Aswan, that's when Asa Hilliard took ill and became an ancestor in Cairo. Baba Jeremiah Wright easing his last days, facilitating medical care and treatment, praying over him, even as we had sent him back to Cairo from Aswan, where he was after he passed out at the closing banquet. Naeem Akbar was speaking. I'll never forget it. We were in Aswan. And Mama Patsy Joe Hilliard, of course, with him as they rolled him out in a wheelchair to get him to the airport and get him to Cairo, where Reverend Jeremiah Wright and Trinity United Church of Christ had coordinated with the then junior senator out of Illinois, one Barack Hussein Obama, to get him airlifted to Europe to treat him. He said, no, I'm not going. I'm going to stay here. And he made transition in the Nile Valley. That was 2007. And the following year, we came back with about 80 students. But by then, I was at Howard. I was able to leverage the resources of the university to take about 80 students to the Nile Valley to accompany Mama Patsy Joe Hilliard, Baba Ken Nunn, Mama Nefertari Nunn, his wife, and Asa's daughter, his son-in-law daughter, and their two girls. We surrounded them in Zingarata Bisha Heru, members of ASCAC, and we went and had a ritual on the anniversary of that. Thanks to Moses Hanania, the owner of Consolidated Tours of Atlanta, Brother Hatem, who is the owner of Travel House of Egypt. Those are our travel agents. We travel with them because they have worked with us for many decades. Moses is now an ancestor. We just passed the 5th anniversary of his transition, which took place the first week of August 5 years ago. And his daughter Mary is now our locked arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder comrade. And Mary, working out of Atlanta, of course, is who made it possible for us to take this journey, and will make it possible for the journeys we take from going on. Not just Egypt. People want to go to Ghana now, want to go to South Africa, other places, Brazil. So, okay, we can work all that out. But I'm mentioning that now because that following Asa's transition, now the thing that Anderson Thompson said to me shortly before he made transition, years later, that was said to us in 1996 became that much more real. You got next. This is why we brought you. We don't bring people in to run forward with their dreams only. We bring them in because the momentum of memory. When we remember the time, when we remember the space, we remember that all history is about the future. Andy Thompson said that in 1987 at the conference in July 1987 in Aswan to those 1,000 Africans. He says all history is about the future. So you're not just here to have a good time. You're not just here to be in awe. You're not just here to sit and meditate and think about this and reflect. You're here so you can fortify yourself because you got next in that long momentum of memory that does not start with the trauma, that embraces the struggle dimension, that has study, that has the discipline. Shout out to everybody who survived our journey. That was 2 hard weeks. The first day we came to the hotel in Cairo, we chilled for a minute. Everybody got a chance to enjoy the hotel, go to the pool, get something to eat, whatever. And then next morning we were up bright and early, 5:30, 6 a.m. wake-up calls were pretty much the course of the day because we want to get out before the sun hit. It was hot. It was so hot in Egypt that the Egyptians were saying it was hot. That should tell you how hot it was. But we were at the Great Pyramid. We went into the Pyramid of Khufu. And between May and now, lost, I guess, close to 30 pounds. Just through discipline, eating, exercise, and this kind of thing, trying to stay in shape. I tell you right now, Khufu's workout plan. I don't know about Kanye's workout plan. That was a song. But going into the Pyramid of Khufu, Menkaure, Khafre, the 3 big pyramids of the Old Kingdom on the Giza Plateau, preceded by Khufu's father, Seneferu, who built the Bent Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, the so-called Bent Pyramid, going into the Pyramid Age. These are big public works that were created, as we talked about before. But by the time you come in there drenched in sweat, as I talked about when we were here a couple of weeks ago, we started singing Lift Every Voice and Sing. We came out, I think I left about 5 pounds of water weight in that pyramid. But so it's very austere, but study, fasting, the discipline of training, and then the fight. Black August. is what we're talking about. And so, when you return it from Kemet, we felt that maybe it'd be good to draw this session, this title from 232, our 232nd consecutive week of having conversation, focusing on Black August admonition to study, fast, train, and fight. But as 2024's political season continues to unfold, remember we talked about this at the beginning of the year, half the world's countries would be in some form of election. Today's New York Times, if I have it, what I do with today's Times, here it is. Today's New York Times has a story. We're seeing all kind of stuff taking place all over the world. Y'all probably saw what happened in Thailand. They done switched out, the young people that voted, everybody voted. They had an election. They disqualified the person who won. And now Piconic Tarn, Srinivasana, who is 37, poised to become the country's prime minister on Friday because they overturned all the elections and put in this lady right here who's part of a political dynasty, a new Thai leader, but the power brokers are the same as ever. They basically hijacked their election. And we know, Venezuela continues to unfold. The United States has not been able yet to do what they've been trying to do since at least Hugo Chavez, which is rein Venezuela in and get a client puppet government in. Nicolas Maduro, we talk about Jamal Bowen or Cori Bush, but Nicolas Maduro has made a mess, in part, made some missteps, maybe stayed too long. But that revolution that was started by Hugo Chavez, that the United States has hated since they put that puppet Juan Guaido, tried to put him in, they threw shoes at him, he got the hell out of Dodge. And the current person they said won the election, who there's really no evidence that they did, has caused the hemisphere to draw sides. Mexico, Brazil, which is moving maybe a little bit at a different pace than Mexico. The question of having Venezuela release the results. What we know is that regardless of what Maduro has done and didn't do in terms of being reelected, that's a separate issue from the interference of the United States in the entire world. Certainly what they would call the United States backyard in terms of Monroe Doctrine, the Latin American and Caribbean countries. We know that the world is continuing in this movement, and it's a transformative moment in world history. I want to talk more about elections in Kashmir. Modi trying to, in India, force now to allow Kashmiris to have some more autonomy. All this stuff is going on in real time. Kenya, it's an article in today's paper about the Kenyan movements, the movements for justice. Maybe they're going to run Ruto out of the prime ministership in Kenya. All this is going on. We haven't forgotten about Haiti, where that invasion force is there, led by the Kenyans. But again, the question of can Haiti continue to fight what Randall Robinson called to escape its unbroken agony as a result of their resistance in the 19th century and the 18th century? The answer is yes, and they will triumph ultimately. But we study these things to connect, to build our mass movements. Here in the United States of America, in the duopoly, you have now Kamala Harris being the nominee for the presidency of the United States from the Democratic Party. She's not Toussaint Louverture or Cecile Fatimon. She's not Harriet Tubman. She's an elected politician, but she comes in a genealogy of meaning. One that, in spite of anybody's instincts or efforts, can yield something very different if we simply tap into that momentum of memory and understand that history being about the future, we can learn from what we have done before to advance something that we do want collectively, in spite of, or maybe sometimes even because of, the efforts of elected politicians. Only one tool in the toolbox. But as we think about 2024's potentially transformative season of world and U.S. politics, we got to ask ourselves that critical question raised by meaning making in the Africana Studies framework. It's raised in the Africana Cultural Meaning-Makers from Michael Jackson. Do you remember the time when we fell in love? To Earth, Wind, and Fire. Do you remember? Because September is right around the corner. And again, I just want to mention this in passing. You've seen me hold this book up before. It's an excellent book. This brother Trenton Bailey, who's taught for many years in the Atlanta University Center, got his PhD at Clark, Atlanta. Dan Black knows him well on Baba Mutosho. Do you remember? Celebrating 50 years of Earth, Wind, and Fire, Trenton Bailey. And it's very interesting. Brother Trenton is from Memphis, Tennessee. But he writes about how Maurice White, founder of Earth, Wind, and Fire, was fascinated with Egyptology. You see the Tekken there, the Ankh there, the symbol of life. The wings can be associated with Ma'at, can be associated with Mut, can be associated with Aset or Isis there on the sides. You see the pyramids there. And of course, we know if we started going through and looking at all the album covers, there's Heru and the Best of Earth, Wind, and Fire there. You see the Beth Volume 2, you see the Pharaoh there. Any number of, but if you just looked at the album covers, you would get a sense. And of course, as Maurice White would sing, it is written, in fact, in the stone. But in rereading this book, and this is one I almost put in my bag to take with me, but I didn't. I decided to travel light. And in a moment, I'll share some of the things that I got while I was over in the Nile Valley. I'm still unpacking. But this book reminds us that it isn't just about reveling in the past. It isn't really even primarily about that. It's certainly not exclusively about that. It is about grounding ourselves in cultural meaning making that opens up our ways of knowing, because Earth, Wind, and Fire is all about that spiritual music, all about that spiritual music. And I remember, and y'all may remember I talked about this before. By the way, shout out to Mama Nia Damali, whose birthday just passed. Happy belated birthday, Mama Nia, the owner of Madu Bookstore in Atlanta, which is where when this book came out, I bought it. Do you remember? With her, it came out last year. This is her first printing. She had a book signing for Brother Bailey, Dr. Bailey, Professor Bailey. Shout out Mama Nia, happy belated birthday, Elder. Now remember the time when we still had the responsibility of managing the freshman seminar for the College of Arts and Sciences at Howard before it was destroyed by the current dean and reconfigured into something that they continue to try to persist with. And I wish them well, but in a way, I'm glad to have been relieved of that duty, because it helped open up more space for me to do this work, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the central work. I remember the time and being challenged in conversation. I just used it as an opening video to get to the subject I want to discuss. But in the conversation we had, one young sister was like, why would you show Michael Jackson? He's a pedophile and child abuser. And, I obviously engaged that, absorbed that, embraced that conversation, in addition to setting aside the court of law stuff. Let's not even talk about the court of law and no convictions. Let's talk about why that is a thing we need to talk about. We had that conversation, and I stayed up all night. And the following day for the second session, because we had about 1,500 students, we split up in about 750 apiece. This following day, I had rewritten what I was going to say. I usually give the same lecture twice, or at least try to make some small adjustments, but I rewritten it, not to get rid of Remember the Time. I absolutely played it again, but then began to explore what is the responsibility of cultural meaning makers in a society, particularly talking about African people. We were in New York. Reba Kelsey and I, we were in New York the day before we took the plane from JFK to Kemet. And we went by an exhibit at the New York Public Library to see, James Baldwin's centennial 100th birthday just passed, and they have a big exhibit at the Schomburg we couldn't get to, but we did go to the New York Public Library and saw among other things, the original cast poster and show notes for The Wiz. There's been a revival of The Wiz. In fact, we saw a grandmother and granddaughter in the hotel who were getting ready to go that night to see The Wiz, to see the grandbaby. So excited. You think about Michael Joseph Jackson, you can't win. You can't break even. You can't get out of the game. And then years later, Remember the Time, and every other song in between. You ask yourself, what is the value and what is the meaning of a cultural meaning maker? And can you or should you try to separate the meaning maker from the cultural meaning making? The answer to that, of course, is that it is impossible to do that, even as we often do it. But that moment, being challenged about that, being questioned about that. I won't say challenged, because again, thinking about Reba Kelsey saying, let us agree to agree. That young person made me do what I need to do as a teacher always, which is think and rethink. And it opened up a process of dialogue. If we approach any conversation with a spirit of love and generosity, and we had a couple of those in Kemet, everybody in Kemet knows, it allows us to get to a point where we understand that our common purpose remains at the anchor of everything that we do. We have to remember that. And so it just made me think about that. We have built a space where we have jailbroken the classroom, and it has taken root. Howard is welcoming almost 3,000 fresh people into the class. And school starts next week. Classes start next week. Ain't no place to put most of those young people. So they doubling up and tripling up rooms. They didn't rented out hotel space. And you wonder why you're doing this. Some of it has to do with revenue and balancing a budget, and, trying to maintain things. But those are all, I suppose, as Marlo would say from The Wire, when them good problems or not, because it costs almost 60 stacks a year to go to our university. It doesn't cost that to be in class week after week. It costs a couple $100 a year to be in Nubia and narrative, and then Nubia, and have access to that. And those resources get plowed right back into the platform. We have to jailbreak education. Again, Harris Biden. A Pell Grant will cover with a refund the cost of going to Prince George's Community College. And if you've got a dual enrollment program in high school, you can get an associate's degree in high school and then show up at college only having to do 2 years and cut your tuition for the full price of your degree in half at a time when college costs are skyrocketing. If the white nationalists, Trump and them, get back in, you can kiss that Pell Grant goodbye. They're going to get that money back to their billionaire owners. But in that process, then, it just made me think about that when I thought about the cultural meaning makers who have embraced Egypt, whether it be Michael Jackson, who was a bibliophile and read and studied and talked about these kind of things, or whether it be Earth, Wind, and Fire, who even more beautifully, more powerfully, more consistently and deliberately embraced that study of ancient Egypt and put it at the center of their cultural practice. And so, from 2008, when we came back to the Nile Valley in the wake of the passing of Asa Hilliard, who had been one of those founders in the 87 trip and had gone back to the 1960s and 70s, and that worked with his cousin Jacob Carruthers and with his comrade Anderson Thompson and so many others. When we came from 2008 until COVID, we went most years to Kemet. By then, we had to get Mario Beatty and Valethia Watkins and Howard, and from where they had been at Chicago State and Olive Howery College, and we traveled with other HBCUs, Morehouse College and Chicago State, a predominantly Black institution, Miles College out of Birmingham, Alabama. Just important to bring that together. But then COVID hit, and we had to put a screeching halt on our journey. When we came back in 2023, the jailbreaking that had taken place during COVID, that started with this conversation, Professor Hunter, that started with this movement, that then blossomed in the narrative, and then Nubia emerges. By then, the jailbreaking transformed completely the unbroken genealogy of the study tours. And we took 200 plus last year, guided by elders who have been in the association and related work for many years. One of those elders accompanying us this year, Benachi Montgomery, a brilliant student of Meta Nature out of Detroit. The Ive Heru Study Group was with us this year, but last year, Alan and Suzanne Flagg and Baba Kwaku, Larry, and Mama Labisi, and so many others came with us. Makeda Kumasi, the president of the Western region of ASCAC, so many others came with us. Sharon Johnson out there in the Western region in LA, who came back this year, who was with her sister, who's probably here this morning. Probably Sharon, you probably here too, Sharon and Alita Hill, who traveling again. So many mothers and fathers with their children this year who accompanied us in the Nile Valley. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But Alita and Sharon were best friends in elementary school in Brooklyn, hadn't seen each other in decades, and were inseparable once they reunited in the Nile Valley and spent the whole 2 weeks just as thick as thieves, as if no time had passed. Time and space begin to collapse when we are doing this common effort and grounding ourselves in memory. So these iterations now, just like Pianki, Shabaka, and Taharka came down the Nile to restore order in the Nile Valley in the so-called 25th dynasty, the 8th century BC or BCE, or 2,800 years before the present. We're going to use that dating as we talked about the other day. Well, in some ways, I consider what we did last year and what we did this year, 24, and what we'll do next year and going forward, as a Wis-misu of sorts, a repetition of the birth, as a return to the platformed kind of institutional thrust, the discipline in our annual Black August in Kemet, a repeat of, a return to those essential thrusts of Ben Yakinen in the desert in the 1940s and 50s, in Carruthers and the KI in the Nile Valley in the 1970s, in the work of Aztec in the 1980s forward to today, in the recruiting of another generation in the 90s, and then in the 2000s, the passing of the baton as one generation begins to make transition in ancestorhood and another one takes that baton. And then after COVID, this became a way of returning to those essential forms. It's very interesting when you were in Cairo and you're standing in the mastaba of Ptahhotep or Kagemi, two important intellectuals and policymakers, chief judges in the case of Kagemi of what we would call the equivalent would be the Egyptian Supreme Court, the 6 administrative court districts of the land. And this guy was in charge of all of them. Also, basically Secretary of the Treasury, also dealing with foreign policy. All these portfolios for this incredibly complex society. And you're standing there and you're realizing that the glyphs are carved with such precision, that the work of that old kingdom is so brilliant. You look into the pyramid of Teti, where the pyramid text, the oldest discovered to date writing dealing with questions of ways of knowing, what we might call religion or spirituality, anywhere in the world yet discovered. We went into that pyramid of Teti, one of the few pyramids where there's writing between Teti and Unas. We didn't go into Unas, who had the pyramid text that predate Teti, but went into Teti that came shortly after. We're talking now about 4,500 years ago, 2,500 years before Jesus Christ. You understand? And looking at those glyphs, the precision with which they are drawn, you realize that the closer you get to now, the less precise those glyphs begin to look. Still brilliant work. My favorite place in the Nile Valley to travel and sit and spend time, the Temple of Abydos, perhaps the oldest source of governance in the Nile Valley. My dear friend and sister was there with her partner, Dr. Courtney Wilkinson, while she's working to open up school here in D.C., Roosevelt High School, where she's the principal. Got her work phone, got her personal phone, working in the Nile Valley, but then in Abydos, the thing just overcame her like it always overcomes me, the brilliance of that new kingdom, 18th, 19th dynasties, Seti the First, Ramses II. Before the political chaos, what's going on in Thailand? There's President for Africa, ask Iron Hormhead what they did to Tutankhamun, King Tut, and his wife. It's all kind of intrigue in these spaces. But of course, Tutankhamun, who is the son of Akhenaten, who built a whole city in the desert, whose mother advised him, just like she was with her partner, Amenhotep III, his mother being Queen T, whose Sahu mummy we saw in the Museum of Egyptian Civilization, one of 5 museums that we visited. We do about a third more in terms of sites, tombs, temples, pyramids, museums, all these sites together. We do about a third more and deal with the people, engage with the folk, with the Nubians, go to the village, provide resources, be in conversation about how we can do even more. We do about a third more in terms of sites than any tour in the Nile Valley of any background. And we're very grateful to the people who enable that work, that blueprint that was laid by these previous generations. But here in this Black August, as we say, you know, we think about that as a Wis-misu. Wis-misu means repetition, to do again. Mesu means to be born in ancient Egyptian language. The repetition of the birth. European, you know, in Latin, you may call it renaissance, naissance from nasi, to be born, renaissance. Oh, we can say the Nubian Renaissance, or you could say the Wis-misu. No need to borrow from a junior language when you have an elder language that you created. Part of it is recovering our memory so that we don't see ourselves as a figment of the white imagination, including in the language. So in that process, I think of 2023 when we return, 2024 as we go on, 2025, 6, 7, 8, and going forward, if we even continue to use those dates exclusively. We had a conversation about dating as well and how that's an arbitrariness of sorts. But all of them now are part of a Wis-misu, because as we see in the Nile Valley, whenever they got in trouble, whether invaders came in or they got internecine conflicts, they fight with each other to restore some sense of a rhythm of unity and collective purpose, they would return to the older age. So they would go back to that pyramid age in the New Kingdom. They would go back to that pyramid age in the late period when you see Pianka, Taharka, and Shabaka coming down the Nile. They stop at Mennefer. They stop at the White Wall, what we would call Memphis. Not the Memphis, Tennessee, the birthplace of the author of Do You Remember, Trenton Bailey, but the Memphis that Memphis is based on, sitting at the Nile, at the delta of the Mississippi, no, the delta of the Nile. And when you see those Nubians stop there, the Shabaka stone, which is Shabaka saying, let us go back to the narrative of how we came into existence, the old story. This is the existence of reality, and this is how existence came into existing. And I want it written not on papyrus, which you can see the worms have been eaten on the papyrus. No. I want this written in granite so that it will be preserved forever. They call it the Shabaka stone. Some Egyptologists refer to it as the Memphite theology, the Mennefer way of knowing. This is the way of the symmetry of existence. Jacob Carruthers does an incredible job writing about this in his book, Medu Neter, 1995, Karnak House Press. Shout out to brother Saba Sakana, who's the publisher out of Trinidad by way of London. But as we think about this in this Black August, as I kind of begin to tie a few things together, on August 21st, 1971, a few days from now, when George Jackson was killed, almost a year to the day from when his brother was killed, trying to break him out of prison, and understanding that one of the brothers who was saddled with he wasn't executed that day in the Marion County Courthouse when Jonathan Jackson was killed. He survived that, but they put him in jail and they let him out, Ruchell McGee, and he made transition the same year, recently. Remember that life in prison is a death sentence for so many. But somehow Mumia Abu Jamal continues to write. Somehow Leonard Peltier continues to speak. These are political prisoners. Saw James Comey, the feckless former director of the FBI, say that if Trump wins, he will dismantle the FBI. And in our political immaturity, we can't see that two or more things can be true at the same time. The FBI has never been a friend of African people. It has assaulted us perpetually. At the same time, the fascists want to use it as a tool to go through straight assaults physically on us, not just crack down on protests, put people in jail, deport 20 million people with ICE. These agencies can't be reformed. They must be reconstructed, as must the whole society. But the question is, what is the best way to do that? There is no one best way to do it. You got to attack it from all sides, depending on where you are in the structure. So many people that have traveled with us in government, in private industry, educators, lawyers, doctors, day laborers, military, ex-military, all Africans. And what and how can you, to use the language of Karen Hunter, how can you bring your brick? Well, to understand what you do with all those bricks, maybe you want to go into the Nile Valley and see what happens when you stack 2 million blocks of stone to the sky. That same sky that Philip Bella said you should keep your head to. Earth, wind, and fire. And that message of how they did that is in the stone, to quote Maurice White. And in the stone, you not only see the possibilities, you see how to do it. These are collective works. One night we were having a conversation. It was very important. We were sitting there, and in the conversation, we were trying to figure out, people asking, what is the meaning of this work? Retired school teacher from Brooklyn was with us. A lot of these retirees, a lot of y'all, look, shout out to all of y'all who, unlike me, started working damn near as a child and retired early. So, it's very, very, very beautiful, Malune Kumi, Mawuli Kumi, Takponwe, brother Mawuli, retired school teacher, 30 years, New York public school system, high school history teacher. And one night in conversation, our nightly conversation, he raised the question of, why we're studying this stuff. And he said, it isn't just the stones in the pyramid. It isn't just the stones in the temple. The real question is, what motivated people to move those stones and put them there? So when you see the monuments, when you see the pyramids, tombs, and temples, you're not looking at the thing for the value just in the thing. You're looking at the why behind the thing. When you go into Set Ma'at, the Arabs call Deir el Medina, the workers' village, where the people who built the tombs, who wrote the glyphs, who constructed the temples and wrote the glyphs, where they lived and worked. Very modest dwelling, very modest community. Several beautiful tombs at the top of the hill where the supervisor of those workers were. And this is the first recorded strike in world history when they feel like they have been abused and they've been treated differently. We saw Governor Walz speaking to AFSCME. Shout out to Lee Merritt, the brother who runs AFSCME, the union here in D.C. And Walz is like, I work with the unions. They work with me. The populists don't know what to do with that because the white nationalists do not love the people. The white nationalists love whiteness. And so when Junior Varsity Vance, JV Vance, is stumbling through his stump speeches, when Donald Trump is saying whatever is possible to get Kamala Harris off TV, and they say they're for the working people, and then you read what they actually have said, and Donald Trump said the quiet part out loud this week while Kamala Harris was in North Carolina talking about tax cuts for the middle class and the working poor who have to pay taxes. Donald Trump is in North Carolina talking about tax cuts for billionaires, more of them. Hey, baby, love it. Keep it going, you brain-addled white nationalist miscreant. Say it with your bird chest that is collapsing even as we speak, because it draws a bright line and people can make a choice. And so when Governor Walz was talking before, asked me the union and saying, I'm always with the unions. Is there room for criticism? You're damn right. There is. However, understand that working class folk have always tried to build solidarity politics in their best interest, and it goes all the way back to Set Ma'at, the workers' village in the New Kingdom. We're talking about 1500 BCE or 3500 before the present, when they say, hey, we ain't drawing no more glyphs on tombs, we ain't digging no more, cutting no more shafts until you have addressed the needs of us and our families. And so they have to do that. 3 tombs at the top of Set Ma'at, the valley, very beautifully painted. You see the hair, like the hair on my head right now, yours, Professor Hunter, and people in this room. The hair that we see, the physical wigs, human hair wigs in the Cairo Museum, in the wig cabinet that always blows people's minds. They say, that's them. Yeah, you ain't got to ask were they black. They wouldn't have understood black in the racial terms we use today because it didn't come out of the trauma of whiteness. Their identity is who they are. And that hair right there, whether it be in the glass case or on the head of Nefertari herself, her Saku, her mummy in the Museum of Egyptian civilization, you see that curl, you see them braids, and you understand these are African people. But working class people have always had to struggle and fight, because in some stories it ain't no good guys, and Kemet was not a perfect society. It's just human beings struggling, trying to figure out how to live together. And so when Brother Mauli, 30 years of teaching in New York, high school students, raises the idea. One of the reasons we're studying this is not just to say, look at this is spectacular, but to say, how did they do it? But then to say, why did they do it? 4 months after the year, the Nile is flooding. 4 months after the year, you're planting and harvesting. And then 4 months of the year, you can't do anything. Can't plant and harvest because the Nile hasn't flooded. And you can't plant because the Nile is flooding. So what do you do with those 4 months? You create great civic projects. Pyramids, tombs, and temples. And you put people to work. Slaves did not build the pyramids. Let's just be candid about that. Let's be clear, as we saw that shirt over and over again in the Nile Valley. So many Nubians wearing the what? Let's be clear. Shirt. Our sister, LaChonda Davis, out the West, when she was a graduate student at San Francisco State University, and the left and right arms administratively of Theophilo Obenga, was the first time the 4 of us had been in the same place. Me, Mario, Valethia, and LaChonda, who played the role in many ways that I played when Obenga was in Philly. The first time before he went back to Africa, then to Paris, then came back to San Francisco to teach for a number of years, and LaChonda was his lieutenant. And so standing there with her in places like Kamambo Temple, comparing notes on how the old man used to pledge us and haze us was a beautiful thing. Love you, sis. To finally be able to be with you in person was quite the experience, because, you know, these are our elders and they pass this on to us. So these themes and convergences are real. And as we think about that, studying, fasting, training, fighting in this context, the momentum of memory is why we do this work. But it only works, and I want to again go back to the New York Times today because there was an article. Some people, probably everybody saw it, but in case you didn't, let me see here. National session, I think. Yeah. Illinois. The Illinois site of 1908 race riot is now a national monument. Washington. This is Zach Montague writing in today's section of the New York Times. President Biden designated a national monument on Friday at the site of a 1908 race riot that laid waste to a black community in Springfield, Illinois. joining civil rights leaders and state lawmakers at the White House to commemorate the 116th anniversary of the rampage. This is the white riot that led to the founding of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Some white folk terrified by this white riot. Henry Moskowitz, Mary White Ovington, William Walling, and William Lloyd Garrison's grandson, Oswald Garrison Villard, came together, called a meeting at Cooper's Union in New York, reached out to some black folk, particularly those who are affiliated with the Niagara movement, William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, folks like Monroe Trotter, James Monroe Trotter, Ida Bell Wells Barnett, and they met at Cooper's Union to create the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, founded by white people. Du Bois was the only office holder who was black in that first group. And Ida Wells and Monroe Trotter, as Valethia discussed when we were in the Nile Valley, when she's talking about black women in leadership, they're very suspicious of Wells and Trotter, these white liberals. Kind of not very much different than today in some ways. And just thinking about that, because 1908, the race riot, the white riot in Springfield, Illinois, the birthplace of Abraham Lincoln, that's what set it off. And yesterday, the federal government, through the President of the United States, declared it a national monument. It goes on and says, this proclamation comes as Mr. Biden looks to burnish his legacy during the remaining months in office. It also takes place nearly 6 weeks after the police shooting of Sonia Massey, a 36-year-old Springfield resident. The ancestors be on the case. 36-year-old Springfield resident whose death renewed national conversations about racism and police violence and drew a direct reproof from the White House. Quote, Sonia's death at the hands of a responding officer reminds us that all too often Black Americans face fears for their safety in ways many of the rest do not. The rest of us do not. End quote, Mr. Biden said in a statement after the shooting last month. Quote, Sonia's family deserves justice, end quote. We can talk more about the Springfield. Y'all can look it up for yourselves. People can look it up if you didn't know the story. But the quote I want to use from this is from Tammy Duckworth, Senator Duckworth out of Illinois, who was present at the signing. And it dovetails with this question of the momentum of memory. This is what Senator Duckworth said after the signing. She says, good things can come out of bad things as long as you don't forget what happened. That's basically Black history if you started with the trauma. This is the resistance that gave us the blues. This is the resistance that gave us the long Black freedom struggle. It's the thing we have to tap into and center in. It is the thing that had me humming Bernice Johnson Reagan, going through the tombs and temples. Whatever song came to mind in my soundtrack, I'm humming it as we're going through. And standing in Abitus, humming it in my breath. Lest I forget Gethsemane. Lest I forget thine agony, lest I forget thy love for me, lead me to Calvary. For me, it's not about Jesus Christ. It's about sacrifice. Oh, one of the most powerful nights we had together, sitting in Luxor, talking about Christianity. I heard something I never heard my brother Mario Beatty talk about. You know, with these Africans from so many different ways of knowing, thinking about the elders who were there, the ministers who were there. We had ministers on this trip talking about their witness for Christianity. Reverend Dina Wingard, my very good friend, our law school classmate, she and Valethia and I in that conversation. And we were having this conversation. It's very interesting to have that conversation, you know. And as we're having that conversation, we're thinking about spirituality. And Mario said something. He said, you know, I watched my father, the great George Beatty. He said, I watched my daddy every night get on his knees and pray. My father, whose family were some of the people who built Mount Carmel Church, Baptist Church in Cincinnati. He said, I would never disrespect and dishonor that genealogy, even as he has been initiated in E5. One of his godparents, one of his leading figures, of course, is Mama Osei. I saw Valethia Watkins do something, by the way, I'd never seen her do in all the years we going to the Nile Valley. She got in the Nile. Not like Dr. Kelsey. Reba Kelsey got in the Nile and did a breaststroke all the way up to where the sisters were gathered. And there was a bunch of sisters, Mama Osei being the leader, and you saw a bunch of sisters out there. Sister Alicia, out the Bay Area, shout out to her. Dr. Wilkerson, Sister Courtney, they're out there, and they coaxing Valethia, come on out here, come on out here. And then they sent Mama Say came up there and whispered something in their ear. Oshun, in this water, you better get in this water. And he went into the Nile. I've never seen that. He's never did that before in all the years. But again, when you start talking about those ways of knowing and spirituality, the momentum of memory reminds us that it doesn't mean that you have to exclude the other ways you articulate this meaning in favor of any other way. We are African people. Let us agree to agree. Standing in a Abitus, looking at the so-called Immaculate Conception, Heru Asar Naset. This is where it comes from. It doesn't destabilize Christianity. I watched my mother kneel on her knees at the White Chapel. I'm going to take a point of personal privilege and take 10 seconds to get up and continue to talk. I go over to one of my study desks in here and pull this photograph that I keep on my altar of my mother at the White Chapel, Senwosret II, right next to the mortuary, to the chapel, the red chapel of Hatshepsut. This is my mama. After having looked at the glyphs on the outside, they let us in there. My mother, who was born on a pallet on a floor in Russell County, Alabama, stone cold Christian to the day she made transition, and to this day right now, still covering us. That's her praying at the White Chapel in Kemet. She did not make a distinction between the spirituality of African people, regardless of what you call that name. It's very important to understand. And she didn't pose for that picture. She praying. I got up in there and took the picture. Come on, Mom. Let me take this picture of you. Don't move, please. But the point is that the question of the complexity of our spirituality should not be something that's up for discussion. People say, well, you had to work hard to study those glyphs. Yeah, that's part of the discipline. Black August is a great time to remind yourself you can do that kind of work. Now, in that process, however, we must understand that we have to embrace that complexity and that we all can do it. This is not the purview of simple academics. This isn't the purview of something that's exclusive. I was rereading John Baynes' book, Visual and Written Culture in Ancient Egypt. One of the things Professor Baynes says is that, as it happens, critics often underestimate the complexity of Egyptian language because they do not appreciate that while the Egyptian script had a monumental hieroglyphic form that is relatively easy to recognize and possess sign forms that are readily distinguishable from one another, variant sign forms in the altogether more widespread cursive hieratic script are less memorable and distinct. And some common groups in it are run together into ligatures. Such scripts require frequent use to be effective in several ways. Arguments like these are misdirected. They are also self-evidently Eurocentric and make no attempt to view the matter from the perspective of the actors. Examples like Japanese and Chinese show that the complexity of a script is no barrier to widespread or universal dissemination of writing and literacy. Furthermore, the alphabet's simplicity as a code brings with it a greater abstraction and arbitrariness and a lesser capacity to incorporate cultural meanings. He's writing this in the beginning of this book in response to the idea that the alphabet that we use is the best form of written communication because it is the most accessible to everybody. He said, but you don't say that about Chinese or Korean or Japanese. Their symbol system is widely available to everyone. He says, so don't act like these ancient Egyptians that the thing is too hard for you to study or that it's only the purview of the elite. No, we have no record of all who could read or write in Kemet. When you go to the workers' village, you realize these people who live in very simply with their beer and bread and families and communities and the people surrounding them, they're the ones who are writing those magnificent things that are now all over the world because of the damn thieves of Europe that are in the Louvre, like the ceiling from Dendera, this Dendera Zodiac. We went to the temple where they got a replacement in there because you done carved it out and put it in the Louvre, or the Met, where you got a whole temple you dismantled and took with you, or the Tekken that are in England and France, among other places, or Germany, for examples. You look at these things and all those things, all that writing was done by people, wasn't done by the pharaohs. The pharaohs didn't write it. It was the people. Again, as Mauli said, we ain't just looking at the stone, we're looking at the why of the stone. And that's what you see behind it. You see the power of the people. So I'm kind of beginning to wind this up as I'm thinking about it. There's so many things that we could have talked about in terms of this trip. And I wanted to tie it to some of the things as we were watching, as I said last week, on television and reading on the websites what was going on in U.S. politics. From the comfortable distance of a place that didn't have to filter it through the madhouse of the settler colonial state. I remember the first time, you know, I want to talk, maybe I'll begin to wind it up with this. When we think about, and I want to return to some of those contemporary politics to make these points in Black August, which isn't just about the killings of Jonathan Jackson and George Jackson, but the fact that in August 1619, you see those Africans in Port Comfort, Virginia, now enslaved by captives of the English, with the English colonial settlement. The sources of the very useful 1619 project, but it is not a project that I would begin my history with. It's useful for what it does, but again, the momentum of memory requires that we start a very different place, because that's what shapes everything that comes after the momentum. The birthday of Marcus Garvey coming up, the rebellions of August over the years. We talk about the rebellions, the freeing of political prisoners. All this is very important. And in those rituals of grounding that we're engaged in, we think about the contemporary season of elections in the United States, the voter suppression that is certainly being teed up as you see thousands of election officials around the United States of America replaced now at the state, local level. The federal legislature poised to reject election results if they don't like them. While Donald Trump's brain-addled rants, CNN works overtime to try to make sure that they are placed somewhere so they can improve their ratings. And anytime you, well, let me not do that. I'm not going to say anything about that. But the fact of the matter is, the real fight is going to be in the election. And it's going to be about who counts the votes. So you got to make sure to check your voter registration and come in there, because they've got the election officials in place to overturn the election. They will violate, even in Georgia, they're ready to violate their own state constitution to overturn. So you got to vote with enough force to overwhelm the theft. Very important. Harris's gains show us, in terms of these polls, which you can ignore, as Clay Kane said, but it gives a sense of them trying to shape a narrative that is constantly in flux, as being driven in part by a governance formation they don't control. This sense of this momentum, it also shows our political immaturity, and even as it shows the peeking through of our potential. Why does it show political immaturity? She's running on Joe Biden's record and her record with Joe Biden. It didn't change anything, except it changed the face, which means it changed everything. The optics. Imagine a country, imagine a nation driven by optics. Well, that's why you have icons, shrines, rituals, totems. And people say, well, ancient Egyptian, why are we looking at ancient Egyptian? Okay, no less obsessed with ritual. Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, running on virtually the same effort. There'll be some tweaking. I think the foreign policy things will be very important when it comes to Palestine. You see Blinken, that was reported in today's paper as well, overseas trying to stop this. They're meeting in Cairo now. They were in Doha. They were in Qatar. Bibi Netanyahu doesn't want to stop anything. He wants mass murder, and he doesn't want to go to jail. So he's not going to call for a ceasefire. But if enough pressure is put on, you saw the president of Columbia University resign this week, the third Ivy League president. But if enough pressure is put on, and when school starts, that some of them protests going to start again. So Biden's job now, among other things, is to get this ceasefire done, which means he's going to get to put BB in a headlock, a political headlock. Please, if you would stop the guns, that would be ideal. But you ain't going to stop the guns. Kamala Harris says she ain't going to stop the guns either. At least her spokesperson did. However, to be open to the dialogue is signaling enough of a shift away from even the Biden policy that there's a crack of daylight there that you can overwhelm with the force of your collective work and perhaps move that administration differently. You're not going to move the white nationalists of the Donald Trump administration, because his son-in-law has condos planned for the entire West Bank, and he wants everybody dead and gone. If you look at the rhetoric of BB and his war cabinet. But this is all about marketing and imaging in many ways. Biden's policies being repackageable with some slight changes, hopefully on foreign policy with enough effort. But why is Trump foundering? He finally got his match with Obama. He didn't want that though, because this is Kambana. It's the momentum of Barack Obama, except it's Kamala, and this ain't that. And so now he doesn't know what to do. There's been an upgrade of sorts. A morality tale is in place. Good guys versus bad guys. And you got the quintessential central casting hillbilly from Hillbilly Elegy, except he on the Democrat side. Oh, JV, what you gonna do, Silicon Valley? You've been exposed by a true football coach and a guy who had a gun who said, I was the best shot in Congress for years. I got the awards to prove it. And I say assault weapons don't belong in schools. What do you say, JV? I can't wait to debate you with the quick intervention of governance formation, black women and men. So they're honoring Jesse Jackson at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. And I can't wait to see how they're going to do this, because it was the evasion of the Rainbow Coalition, the evasion of the Populist Rebellion, the evasion of the Black Freedom Movement, grounded in Mississippi Freedom Democrats and Fannie Hamer in 1964. Then the nadir in 1968, where Lyndon Johnson, and this is the book I mentioned earlier, I'm going to show it to you all now if I can find my copy somewhere around. Yes, this book just came out. It's called The Year That Broke Politics, Collusion and Chaos in the Presidential Election of 1968. Luke Nichter. Luke Nichter has written extensively on these subjects. He's at Chapman University. I want to read to you from the cover. He says, the 1968 presidential race was a contentious battle between Vice President Hubert Humphrey, Republican Richard Nixon, and former Alabama Governor George Wallace. Do you remember George Wallace? The White Nationalist Party now is the party of George Wallace. Not even. Because Donald Trump don't even know politics. It's like there ain't no third party. No, the insurgency is now the Republican Party, the White Nationalist insurgency. Says the United States was reeling from assassinations of Martin King and Robert Kennedy, was bitterly divided. How about that? Bobby Kennedy still as a Kennedy potentially in this thing, and was bitterly divided on the Vietnam War and domestic issues, insert Palestine there, including civil rights and rising crime. There you go, insert Black Lives Matter, woke culture, CRT, where you want to put it. Drawing on previously unexamined archives and numerous interviews, Luke Nichter upends the conventional understanding of the campaign. He writes, how the evangelist Billy Graham, now mind you, Franklin Graham, as we read a couple of weeks ago, the week before I left in the Financial Times, is all in for Donald John Trump. His daddy, Billy Graham, watch this. Billy Graham met with Lyndon Baines Johnson after the president's attempt to re-enter the race was stymied by his own party. Remember, Donald Trump said, Joe Biden wants to come back in. Well, in 1968, Lyndon Baines Johnson was trying to re-enter the race. People talk about Johnson quit, and then Bobby Kennedy gets killed. Hubert Humphrey takes up the bloodstained banner, gets beat by Nixon, the silent majority. Some of y'all lived through that. Many people who didn't know about it, maybe who don't, you're learning about it for the first time. This is the conventional logic. However, that ain't what happened, because Richter had gone through previous inaccessible archives, including the vast Billy Graham archive in North Carolina. And what does he discover in Billy Graham's diary? Billy Graham reached out to Lyndon Johnson, who wanted to get back in the race. In reality, as opposed to Donald Trump's fantasy that Joe Biden wants to get back in the race, which ain't going to happen. And it says Nixon. He said, Graham met with Johnson after the president's attempt to re-enter the race was stymied by his own party. So they shut it down. You can't come back in here, just like Joe Biden was shut down by the Democrats. You got to get out the race. And then on the way out, he threw the middle finger up and said, I endorse Kamala Harris. Oh shit, the black woman met, and the rest is history, at least has been for the first month of this, if we can continue the momentum. He writes, Nixon, if elected, here was the deal that Billy Graham offered Lyndon Baines Johnson. Nixon, if elected, would continue Johnson's Vietnam War policy and also not oppose his Great Society if Johnson would soften his support for Humphrey. Johnson agreed. Lyndon Johnson undermined Humphrey by pulling back full-throated support. Humphrey lost that election. The rest is history. That's why he names his book The Year That Broke Politics, 1968. It ain't 64 with Goldwater. It's 68. Vietnam. Now, coming to Chicago next week, the same Chicago where you saw there's no Richard Daley now as the mayor, is Brandon Johnson. The brother is the mayor. There's going to be huge anti-war protests. There's going to be a Democratic Party that made a deliberate decision in 1988 in the wake of the second Jackson campaign, where he wins a plurality of the votes and is headed to Atlanta for the Democratic National Convention in a brokered convention. Not like what we talking about this year. I'm talking about because I was in law school at the time. We all going to Atlanta too. We done worked on the Jackson campaigns in 84 when I was an undergrad. We did it. In 88, I was in law school. We did it. And now we going to Atlanta. Why? Because there's nobody with enough votes to be the nominee. Dukakis, Jackson, right there. We're going to see what we're going to do. Jesse gave up all his delegates and endorsed Dukakis. And we were furious. So this is a betrayal. Because this is a chance to bust open the Democratic Party and finally push it to a point where you can have a different kind of populism. Black people, poor people, Latinos, the migrant workers in California, the coal miners in West Virginia, where Jesse stood with them, and these old white people sitting there haggard, coal on their face. I'm going with the Rainbow Coalition. Oh shit, this could be a different thing. And it was Bill Clinton, Al Gore, Joe Biden. So many of them said, we got to put this DLC together, this Democratic Leadership Coalition. We're going to create a centrist Democratic Party to staunch the long struggle within the Democratic Party from those people whose votes we need to turn this into something that's completely out of place. Remember Jesse, go and look on YouTube of Jesse Jackson's 1984 and 1988 speeches at the Democratic National Convention. Especially go to 1984, Our Time Has Come, where he says, our government would support genocide and apartheid in South Africa. This is a moral disgrace. And that's what, remember, Daddy-O and them in Stetsasonic put at the beginning of their song, Africa. You see Jesse at the convention. It's a moral disgrace. It's a moral disgrace because apartheid is still around now. This one, Kamala Harris was an undergrad at Howard going to marches on the National Mall, the anti-apartheid movement. The Jackson campaign was not about Jesse Jackson, his outsized charisma and intellect notwithstanding. It's about the movement that out of which he emerged, which goes back to Gary in 1972, which goes back to 1964, the Freedom Democrats, and comes forward to 1984, the campaign, in 1988, the campaign. And when he turns those delegates over, what else does he do? He turns over some of his leadership. A young woman named Donna Brazile, a brother named Ron Brown, who becomes Bill Clinton's campaign manager in 92 when he wins with a plurality of the vote, because if you remember, there was a third-party campaign that year too, H. Ross Perot. But by then, the Democratic Party has beaten back the populist wing, the Africans. You've got black people in electoral politics, but the core Democratic Party now, you would look at them maybe 30 years before they'd be Republicans. I mean, they've beaten back that progressive move. So for them in 2024 to say they honoring Jesse Jackson, it ain't just about the fact they're in Chicago. This may be evidence of a movement that they can't contain. So again, they're going to try to embrace it. But guess what? Who's on the sideline now? That previous generation. Sure, they're deal making. That's how they got rid of Joe Biden, and everybody's writing about it. But in Harris, is there a possibility? This is an open question. We'll talk about this Monday night as I kind of begin to round to a conclusion. We'll talk about this Monday night a little bit. Is there a possibility of an action we can take that can build on that momentum that started a month ago with those sisters on that call, to begin to infuse this with something else? Because the morality has shifted. The optics have shifted. Donald Trump understands that viscerally. That's why he is floundering. The morality tale has emerged. So honoring Jesse Jackson for 84 and 88 after the kneecapping of that campaign and that movement by Bill Clinton and the DLC and the retrenchment of soft white nationalism in the wake of it. Oh, we have to remember. Do we remember the time? If we remember the time, we know we've seen this show before and we can do something about it, because if history is about the future, we can make the adjustments necessary to say, not this time. We will not see a repeat of 1968. So attempting to wrap our minds around these things require narrative. That's where I want to end. Going to the Nile Valley for me is about, among other things, thinking about things in big picture narratives. Drilling down on detail for sure. There's no finer student of Egypt than Mario Beatty. We're blessed to have that brother walking the earth. I'm blessed to call him my brother and comrade. And I can think about how these things relate to one another, these connections, these connecting the dots, these connections. Kemet, the first 2 weeks of August every year, now resuming post the pandemic phase of COVID. And we had COVID challenges. Some people had it. We had a frank and candid conversation about that. We had cultural distances and divisions and had conversations about that. And everything on the ended up as us being together because we agreed to agree is a beautiful thing. But attempting to wrap one's mind around the entirety of Kemet, a 3,000 plus year old civilization documented, not to mention the thousands of years that preceded in inner Africa, is a difficult thing. Barry Kemp, the Egyptologist who made transition in May of this year, wrote a great book called Ancient Egypt, Anatomy of a Civilization. I encourage you to get particularly the third edition, where he's talking about the social history of Kemet. And so I like to sit with that and try to think about it. But, I also think about it through the mind of our African-centered scholars, the ones that trained me, like Jacob Hudson Carruthers, Jetty Simshu Yehudi. And I'll never forget, I had a copy of The Mind of Egypt one time. I bought him a copy and I kept a copy. And he was reading it and he was having conversations about it. He was so patient with me because, when I was younger, I always wanted to have a grand theory to explain everything. Some of that's still with me, but not nearly as much as it used to be. And we were in Ghana and Egypt in 1996. 7 years after that 1987 trip, I would bring things up. He would listen and he would ask a question. I would ask him a question. He'd give an answer. And that kind of patience and that generosity is what allowed us to travel in the Nile Valley. We have inherited that and passed it on to each other. Like I said, Sister Erica's in Ghana, who was with us. Kat had just been in Ghana. Sister Tanae came up from Tanzania. I mean, she's in Nubian. She came in from Tanzania. Brother Wayne Jarvis, our brother from the UK by the way of the Caribbean, but by the way of UK, raised in England. In the Cairo airport, we said goodbye to him as he took off and went. He spent the night and then went back to Mother England for them. Mama Kimba and Brother Kalanji and Zinga, mother and son. She a longtime member of the Association for the Study of Classified Civilizations, a stalwart of the Midwest region. He a professor now at the University of Colorado Boulder, going back to infuse his students. Mother and son traveling through the Nile Valley. Come on, y'all. Dr. Cynthia Jarvis and Belinda Madison talking to Belinda about, marine topography as we're in the Nile and what fish are in here, what fish aren't in here. The genius of African people convened around conversations that you couldn't even imagine. Lawrence Noble Sr. and Jr., saying I want to bring this back to Sophia Noble, the great scholar, and that's their family, and her husband. I mean, man, this is a great convening of people. Jamal J. Jasiri Young, Jamal Young giving us great insights all the way through. Had been traveled to the Nile Valley several times, including with Manu Ampin and Tony Browder, and he's going through the politics, everything from the politics of Christianity right down to chapter and verse of how the Roman Empire expanded, and all the way down through when we're in the Aswan Museum, the curation of proto-history, the development of human species, which is curated in the Aswan Museum, all the way through to today. Very important. And who was in tow? His twin son and daughter. Shout out to Jade Jasiri Young, who are there. It's a beautiful thing. And they weren't the only teenagers there as well. I mean, I mentioned Jeanette Hawes before, of course. Dr. Castor, Shamari Castor and her crew, all the folks who were there, a colleague at Howard University. She came with us before COVID hit, and then came back now with a bunch of people, including a family who we raised the name of yesterday. They had a ritual. Cheryl Ann, Charles Williamson's father, made transition while we were in the Nile Valley. We were in the Cairo Museum, like day 2, day 3. And Brother Tyrone Williamson, her partner, her husband, and they had their 14-year-old daughter. Shout out to Sister Sanyu Charles Williamson, another teenager who was with us. And Tyrone said, yeah, man, when are we going to Abu Simbel? I told Wes near the end of the trip. He said, okay, well, we may have to make some different kind of arrangements because, we just got news that my wife's father made transition. So we call his name as he begins his ancestral journey here. They made it back in time for the funeral. Egypt Air wasn't able to get them out before that. But to have them embrace, they had their wedding anniversary there. The Nubians, by the time we got to Aswan, that's where the Nubian kick-ass chefs are. And they cook everything. Oh my God, I don't miss all that food. And they made them a special anniversary surprise, cake. Everybody had cake. It was beautiful. But I'm sure that made that transition. Ain't the first time. Last year, remember, we had a transition that happened while we were away. You get a chance to pour libation. You get a chance to be in community. You get a chance to ground with each other. And what a blessing to be in that space. Young Warren came. And his mother was there. It's important. Warren was another one of our teenagers who was there. And it's very important to understand. So shout out Renee and Warren that came. But those objectives of this annual reset for me involve reflection over the previous year's cycle, all the places we've been, to quote Gil Scott-Heron, all the things we've convened and had community with, to see Jelani and them after I just saw them, in Dayton and in Ohio for the Martin Delaney ritual. My man Travis Armstrong, Travis, part of them brothers, man, got to connect y'all with the Pyramid Brothers who came the year before. Some of them say they coming back. This question of past, present, and future is very important. To engage with the question of Kush or Nubia or the Sudan. There's a book by Christopher Counsell called Bounds of Blackness, African Americans, Sudan, and the Politics of Solidarity, where he talks about everything from ancient Sudan to today, the connection between Africans in the world and Sudan, where the Nubians are, and Kush, and Merowe, and Aksum. At Abu Simbel, we're coming back from the temple, and there was this young girl The vendors are selling things. They get the little children trying to sell stuff, little trinkets, little bracelets, and things like that. Coming around the bed from Abu Simbel, and this little girl said, what is your, she said, oh, we'd like to buy something. I said, what you got? So she got a little trinket to it, got a fistful of money. This child was kind of that kind of dark chocolate black. Black is a racial category, dark chocolate color. Beautiful little girl, little skinny girl. And I put her maybe at 6, 7 years old, maybe 8. And as she's selling, what's your name? I think it was Fatimata. Y'all remember the name, didn't I said, what's your name? She said, oh, what's that? And she showed me this pen. This pen has Egypt on it. But the thing that drew my attention wasn't the pen, it was the top of the pen. Y'all see that flag? I said, look at that flag. I said, where you from? And you see the Egyptian flag, but she wasn't Egyptian. She's not from Sudan. We were a stone's throw from the border of Sudan. Abu Simbel is about 20 kilometers from the Sudan border. The first cataract is in Egypt. All the other cataracts, the stones that kind of shape the course of the Nile, are in the Sudan. So the last cataract, if you're going from south to north, White Nile coming out of Sudan, Blue Nile coming out of Ethiopia, meeting up in Khartoum, and then coming down the Nile, because the Nile runs south to north because of topography, over that last cataract in Elephantine. This little Nubian girl from Sudan. So of course I bought the pen from her, and I'm gonna keep this pen right here on my desk because it reminds me of that child. The future, all history is about the future. Is she there because she was in a refugee camp? Is there conflict? I mean, because Sudan and Egypt have had some beefs. There's a dam in Ethiopia, they got beef about that. But ultimately, the future is about those investments. And whether it be discussing religion with Reverend Livonia Mallory, who was walking around the Nile Valley and studying these ritual places, and we're having these conversations about Christianity. And she interviewed Mario and I for her podcast that she does. And one day she had on the shirt that said she was, unapologetically Christian and black, and with Jeremiah Wright's name at the bottom, Baba J, say it's Jeremiah Wright. That's what we're talking about. And that convergence, talking about everything from Protect Black Women, Sister Aticia and Stephanie Burrell, her partner, and Stephanie's parents, who are probably here, who listen to In Class every week. They're in Florida. And I told her that, I was so happy that they are here. And so I'm just blessed that, in thinking about them, that in fact, I'm trying to see, because I wrote their names down and I wanted you all to hear their names, and I don't see the note I made to myself. I got to put it somewhere else. I'll bring them up in office hours, and then next week. She said, my parents never miss. They never miss being in class. And our sister Tanya Pinkins, who's traveled all over the world, and she's up into her mid-70s in terms of countries. And she said it's the best tour that I've ever taken, and she's been everywhere. We're talking about all the places she's been. She was on our bus. She was on Baba Abdul's bus, the red bus, the royal family bus, and she taught all these people how to play Bitwis. And so I'm looking forward to learning Bitwis, because I was watching them, and they some serious players. And then Mama Say is like, yeah, they froze me out because they say I don't play that Bitwis. I'm gonna play this other kind of Bitwis. They talking about cutthroat, and I'm like, yo, he said this ain't spades. I'm like, yo, and I've heard you talk about that, Karen, as well. So I'm gonna end, because out of all the places we've been, it was a reminder of time and space. If y'all are around DC next Saturday, at Sankofa, Mike, Harriet, and I are going to be talking about this Black AF history. Mike's coming to town on the 24th. My sister's birthday. We'll be at Sankofa. I think it's an evening thing. I think it's 6:30, but you can check Sankofa's website. I'll check it out in a minute. We'll keep talking about this on Monday night. But
your sister's birthday is August 24th?
Yep.
That's your Reyes's birthday?
Oh!
That's Carl's birthday.
What?
Yeah, how wild.
Oh, that's crazy. Come on back in. I'm done. I just that's so that Bitwis thing, y'all serious about wits? I was like, what is going on?
Yeah. It's a brain game. It's a brain
That's what
game.
you said.
My father says whist means hush. I don't know if that's true, but he said bid and then hush. You gotta think. You gotta play with your mind.
Well, I shout out to brother Bill, because we were in the Cairo airport getting ready to fly back. No, we were in the Aswan airport getting ready to fly back to Cairo to come back here. And they were playing. Tanya had a whist table where she was teaching. She taught Rita how to teach this whist.
Love it.
So they're playing. And then the table next to it, Bill and them had a game going. Alita and them over there. And all these white people came in. They get ready to get on the plane too. We had a charter plane. Shout out again to Hatem. They go first class. We travel charter. We ain't gonna try to worry about the luggage and the weight. We're gonna ship everything back to the United States, right? So everybody's playing. It's quiet. All these white people are coming in. Clearly, they're not U.S. white people. I'm saying maybe Spanish, some different. There's one lady from Chile I met in the pyramid. Very interesting. You tell him conversation on politics. Anyway, we're in there. All of a sudden, Bill, bring that shit back. And I was like, and all these white people were like, boy, these Negroes gonna scare everybody in the Aswan airport. It's a serious game. I'm like, what are y'all doing?
Yeah. When you talk about running a Boston in spades, you can literally run a Boston in bid whist just about every hand if you know how to play. Right.
Wow.
So when you talk about running a Boston, that's a bid whist actual, etymology must be rooted in bid whist, running a Boston.
Wow.
Yeah, because you control the hand. So you could literally, you and your partner run the table.
Run the table.
Yeah.
Well, look, I am.
So let's make some time to do that. Maybe I'll come down to DC.
Well, I would love that, because that's the thing. I didn't learn it from Tanya because you supposed to teach me. So I didn't want that to be.
No, I'm not.
No. I like that kind of thing, because again, my thing is always mouth to ear. So I'm saying you the one brought it up to me. So I said I'm gonna watch y'all, but I'm gonna learn it from Karen. So that's what I'm saying. I'm looking forward to that. Is what I'm saying.
Learn from the best, Dr. Carr. I probably
see.
So there's that.
See.
Yes. Tanya, challenge. We are publicly challenging you. To yes. That's how confident I am.
You know what?
Yeah.
Then I think, hey y'all, I think this is set up for some Ali Foreman or Ali Frazier, probably not even.
And we should film it. Yeah.
It should be filmed.
Somebody talking about pinochle, double deck, single deck. Come on, don't play with it. Come on, stop.